If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
Hikers, campers, hunters, and woods dwellers of backcountry and haunted forests, share your scariest paranormal, supernatural and creepy, spooky encounters deep in the boonies. What's the one story you've never been able to forget?
When I saw an unknown creature. My family and I were driving somewhere, and I was staring out of the window as I saw the landscape beside our vehicle. At first, everything was normal. Just green trees and blue skies. Then, I saw a red barn far away from us. It was located right beside the road, yet it felt distant from us. It looked slanted slightly. Like the barn was about to collapse almost immediately. Just as I got a good look at the barn, a man came from behind it and ran towards the forest, disappearing into the trees. No one saw what I saw, but I'm hoping that thing doesn't harm anybody. The man himself looked pale, like his skin was gray from what I saw. His body was slender, and no, it wasn't Slender Man. He wasn't wearing a suit, he looked like he was naked when he ran into the woods. At some point, when I saw him running into the woods, he posed like that one Bigfoot photo. The entire experience made me share that story, but naturally, people did not believe me because I was so young at the time. However, I'm older now, and I can remember that encounter vividly. Even if it was short. Black wavy rectangle moving through woods during daytime. My friend's dad is an experienced woodsman. He relayed a story that took place last fall in the Shasta Wilderness in California. He was on a fairly arduous hike deep into remote woods to do some fishing in a hole, and at one point he scrambled up a hillside to get around some thick mud on the trail. He stops and sits on a log for a minute to catch his breath, and he sees what he described as a black, wavy, very thin rectangle, roughly 8 tall and 6 wide, moving down the hillside roughly 150 away. He said it almost looked like a black sheet because it wasn't perfectly straight, it was wavering as it moved. He said you couldn't see through it. After a few seconds it starts moving up the hillside. He described it as if it were almost patrolling. We asked if it was shiny or matte colored, and he said it looked like it was reflecting some light, like parts when it moved had a sheen to it. Then it either moved so fast he couldn't track it or teleport it even closer to his position. He said it looked like it grew in size, not just because it was closer. At this point he got a little nervous, and the only thing he had quickly available was bear spray he had in his pocket. As soon as he pulled it out and held it up, whatever it was disappeared. I asked him the obvious question, did he have his phone on him to take a pic? But his phone was buried in his backpack in a plastic bag to keep it dry, which I understand. I've hiked these trails and do the same thing. There is no service up there, so there is no reason to have it too handy. I've known this guy for 20 years. He isn't prone to tell tall tales or exaggerate. He said he wasn't scared of it, at least at the start. He was just trying to make some sort of rational sense of what he was seeing. We have done some searching on this and can't find a single instance of a similar story. I figure if there is any place to ask, this would be the one. Has anyone heard of anything like this before? We are completely stumped. Wisconsin about 17 years ago. I was out in the woods with an ex-girlfriend, lying on a hill in a nature park, watching the stars. It was around midnight. Something behind us and on top of the hill got my attention, but not yet hers. When I turned around, I saw what looked like a 7-8 foot tall thing, somewhat illuminated by the moonlight, standing at the top of the hill. I'd say about 30 yards away. It proceeded to whip its head left to right, almost as if it knew something was there but didn't know where. This was accompanied by huffs, low growls, and almost spitting type sounds. By now, of course, she had joined me in looking at whatever this was. It whipped its head to our right one more time and bolted on 2 legs down the hill away from us but still in view as it ran down. It was fast. The moment we lost sight of it, we gathered the blanket and got the heck out of there. I have never seen anything like it to this day, and I would never want to experience it again. I heard awful cackling laughter, seemingly coming from all directions at once, almost like the cackling was spinning around me. The woods had grown absolutely silent except for the cackling. It grew louder and almost frenzied as it seemed to spin around me. I felt like I was stuck standing there, like I couldn't get my legs to move. The cackling started when I was attempting to enter a deeper part of the woods than I'd ever previously gotten to. It was full daylight. I don't know how long it lasted, but when it stopped, I ran. I still don't know what it was and haven't come up with any ideas that aren't supernatural. It didn't sound like any native bird or animal that I'm aware of. It really sounded like an elderly man cackling and rasping for air, but with almost a sinister gleefulness behind it. It felt and sounded evil. I grew up in those woods, they were behind our farm fields to the back of our home. This experience happened as an adult. Other experiences in those woods included the overpowering feeling of being watched. It especially seemed like you were being watched from high in the treetops, feelings of dread, and the fight or flight response kicking in out of the blue. I realize some of these are probably due to nearby predators. We've had coyotes and black bears out there for sure, or just the general secluded nature of the area causing some paranoia. But the cackling I can't rationalize. After this happened and I told my mom about it, she asked me to not go in there alone anymore. She said she was afraid the woods would take me. Adirondack hunting. Let me tell you the story about the time I was hunting and I watched somebody fade off into existence. I grew up on the southern tip of the Adirondack Park. I have been hunting for about 30 years now. I will always remember the day I witnessed a woman walk through the woods in front of me and then vanish. In 2021 I was hunting a new spot. They had recently cut trees and cleared a nice spot where I could see for almost 200 yards. I was tucked away in a small area of trees that had not been cut, sitting in my camp chair, when I heard footsteps approaching from my left. It sounded bipedal, so I didn't think it was a deer, and this is state land, so it's not totally unheard of to run into another hunter, but it's extremely uncommon. Anyway, I looked over, and it was this lady walking down the freshly cut path of trees. I was super confused because I had to have been at least a mile from any road, and even further from any local hiking trails, but I just sat there frustrated because this lady had just messed up my hunt. As she got closer to me, I just sat and watched. She definitely would have noticed me as she got closer. I was camouflaged, but I was definitely out of place for any slightly trained eye, and I had a blaze orange hat on. However, she never acknowledged my presence, and I did not acknowledge hers. She just went on by, but the weird thing was that she was gliding. I could see her feet moving, and I could hear it, but her torso was just still as could be. I watched her walk about 80 yards past me, along the tree line of this freshly cut timber, then she hung a hard right, went into the trees, and just disappeared. I never saw or heard her again. I finished my hunt, but I left a little earlier than normal that night and never went back there. My son hunted this spot a few weeks later and described an odd feeling, like he wasn't supposed to be there, but never saw or heard anything, especially like this. Thoughts on what I saw and why? I live out in the woods. We hear something that sounds like Sasquatch regularly. In fact, our homestead is called fondly Sasquatch Haven Pond. A few hours ago, maybe around 4 a.m., we both woke to the weirdest noises. Windows were open. We couldn't put our finger on what animal it could possibly be. Then it turned into kind of a woman's voice, but not a natural woman's voice. It's 7 a.m. now, still dark out, and I've been up listening to weird stuff since. Birds are strangely quiet. Weird noise when hunting. I live in a small town with a population of less than 1,000, up in Ontario, Canada. My house is in the woods, so when the season comes, I get out hunting quite a bit. Anyways, a couple of years ago in October, I was in the middle of the bush trying my luck for some early season deer. It was a mild fall that year, so I didn't really need to put on a bunch of layers until the winter, like 15 degrees Celsius or 59 Fahrenheit. It was an hour or so before dark when I got a chill that rushed over my body, and I could start seeing my breath, and I felt like I was being watched. As that happened, I heard a sound I can only describe as wind blowing through metal tubes in a rhythmic tone. It went on for a couple of minutes and then stopped. For whatever reason I was paralyzed while it was happening. Not in the sense of being too scared to move, but something came over me where I physically couldn't move. I can only liken it to when you get sleep paralysis, but I wasn't sleeping at all. I told one person about this, and he looked at me like I was insane. I never even told my wife because I don't know what it was or what it means. I'm not a religious person, I don't believe in monsters, but I genuinely have no idea what that was. I'm sharing this story because I'm wondering if anyone else has a shared experience that could give insight as to what happened to me that day. I still think about it years after it's happened, and it's never happened again since. When I was around 8 or 9, my family left me at our cabin to tend to the cows for a day. My uncle usually watched over them, but my mom had to drive him to the city to pick up a few things. It was around 5 p.m. that I decided to look for the cattle. The cattle sometimes venture deep into the woods, so it took me about 30 minutes to locate them. Once I reached them and got an idea where they were, I headed back home. By then it was twilight. As I was walking through the forest, I felt like something was following me. I heard it again on my right side. Whenever I stopped, it stopped. I was trying to not freak out thinking it was my imagination. I started to walk faster back home, and the thing was still on my right side. I glanced to my side and saw this thing that was peach-colored. It looked like a naked person going behind the trees. After seeing it, I ran home as fast as I could and hid under the blankets. Once my mom and uncle came back, I told them what I saw. My uncle thinks it may have been a bear with mange. But damn, it really did look like a naked person. A living pole. This event took place in 2017. I was camping with my friend. He had a huge farm surrounded by forest. We were outside in front of the farmhouse in a tent. He was asleep, but I, always having insomnia, was wide awake. All of a sudden, I hear loud, slow footsteps coming from out of the forest, coming over in the direction of the tent. This terrified me, because I didn't know what it was. A bear? A deer? A person? No clue. So I was waiting for the footsteps to stop outside the tent, and I was preparing myself for the absolute worst, because since they were heading in the tent's direction, that's what I assumed was going to happen. But it didn't. Instead, these footsteps moved past the tent. So, after hearing these loud, slow, methodical footsteps come from out of the woods, ignoring two defenseless kids, and then silence for easily 10 minutes, curiosity started to eat away at me. When I was a kid, I was stupid. I unzipped the tent and quietly peeked my head out to see if I could see anything. I'm looking all around the tree line, the house, everywhere, and I cannot find the source of these footsteps. I'm just about to put my head back inside when I spot something that doesn't really make sense. Behind the farmhouse to the right is the actual farm, and next to this farm is a pole. I saw what looked like a 30 feet tall, grayish silver pole standing next to this farm. It was shining and glistening in the moonlight. I studied this weird structure up and down with my eyes, confused, because I know damn well I would have easily noticed this 30 feet ducking tall pole bizarrely placed inches away from this farm earlier when it was daytime, but I didn't. As a side note, I should really start calling this thing a pole, because after looking at this strange object really hard, I realized that this ducking pole had arms and legs. They looked like rods, perfectly straight, symmetrical, and proportioned with their size and stature. It appeared remarkably smooth and round, with an elongated shape that is difficult to articulate. I then realized that it was doing something. It was spinning in a circle. Ever so slowly. I was dumbfounded. I had no idea what I could possibly be looking at. All of a sudden, this thing. This 30 feet tall, shiny, spinning, pole-like humanoid thing took an uncomfortably long step back into the woods, spinning ever so slowly, still glistening and shining in the moonlight. I had no idea how to react. I was so at a complete loss for words that I simply went back into the tent and lay on my back until the sun came up. I had no sleep at all, and after that day, I never hung out with my friend at that farm again. I'd what it was. Trick of the eye? A humanoid? A black stick man? Or a glitch? Your guess is as good as mine. Feral people / skinwalkers in Nantahala forest. My brother and I went backpacking in the Nantahala forest, and when we made camp a mile or so off trail and it was getting dark, we heard yelling in the distance. Then we heard it closer and louder. I got up out of bed, and we grabbed our thermal monocular to see if we could see any heat signatures, and as we were walking, something threw a limb through a tree at us and landed 5 feet away, and we looked in the thermal. As we were looking up this hill, we saw something that looked human but was not. It was squatting down and looking at us. It had a small head and wide shoulders, and it looked off and to the side of us. We heard two little boys talking, then we went back to camp to pack up, and we had a rock thrown at us, and it sounded like running down this very steep hill that is impossible to climb up, and we have no idea what we saw and experienced. Please let me know if something happened to you. Do you think there are feral people in the hills of Appalachia, or was it a skinwalker? A Viking era house that doesn't exist. A house that doesn't exist. I have been meaning to write this down for a while now. This happened in the early 2000s, if I remember correctly, maybe 2002. Every day when coming home from school, I took a walk with my dog in the woods. I grew up in the middle of nowhere on the Swedish eastern coast. This is important contextually. This particular day I remember thinking I'd walk up the hill on the left side of the normal trail, up onto a small mountain, and then back down to the trail to get some change of scenery. It was late winter, I believe, since there was a tiny bit of snow on the ground. My dog and I walked all the way up and then turned to walk down to the trail, only, the trail never came. Instead, when I came down the crest to where the trail should be, I saw this rounded timber house with a straw/moss roof and a door hole that was open. My dog refused to go further and wanted to go back, but I was torn between going to look inside or to just turn around. I decided to finally turn, and since I didn't recognize the area anymore, I remember so vividly following my own footsteps in the snow until I got back to the trail again. I went home and immediately told my parents, and the only reason I don't believe this is a false memory is that they both recall it separately. Neither of us has ever seen that house again. Lately I have done some research, and in that particular area there are remnants from Vikings living there, both in and around the town. It was an important trade town back then. Apparently Vikings did make round houses that were often used as sheds or the like. I don't know if I hallucinated or if time suddenly got wonky there, but both my parents have also had odd things happen in that forest. I wonder what would have happened if I went into the house. Need help identifying what I saw. I've lived in WNC my whole life. My house sits in front of the woods, although it's not very secluded. I live right in the middle of my town, so the woods aren't very dense to my knowledge. My family and I would hike through the woods in our backyard occasionally, and they seem to go on for miles, but knowing the surrounding area, I can't imagine it's very big. When I was a kid, in the 5th or 6th grade, my extended family came to our house and stayed a few nights over the summer. My cousins and I decided to have a slumber party on our trampoline since the weather was nice, and what kid in a rural town doesn't love camping? It was dark at this point, but before we went to bed, my whole family was outside hanging out and playing around. At this time, it was dark, and my mother thought it would be enjoyable to demonstrate her new night vision camera and goggles. She let everyone have a turn with it, looking up into the woods for animals. When it was my turn, I looked up into the woods and saw something that terrified me. It looked as if these black, shadowy figures with white glowing eyes were popping out from behind the trees. There were 3 of them, and they would poke out from behind the trees and then go back to hiding behind them. I can't say how long I was looking at them for, but I remember I removed the goggles from my eyes and immediately told my family what I saw. I looked back to see if whatever it was still there, but they were gone. My mom and uncle looked as well and didn't see anything. Nobody would believe me, but I was terrified and refused to stay outside for the rest of that night. I haven't seen those creatures since, but I don't go looking out into the woods at night anymore either. I tried to see them again for maybe about a year after that initial sighting, but I never could, and eventually I just forgot about it. I went digging through ghost stories on the internet, trying to find something that sounded at least a little similar to what I saw, but I couldn't find anything. I'm hoping this community at least helps point me in the right direction. This happened almost 2 years ago. I live in southern BC along the Columbia River, where there are benches of land elevated from the valley floor that people wander on, and some even drive trucks or ATVs up there, creating trails through lightly forested areas. My son and I had gone out for a walk up on one of these benches. We rounded a corner and heard a lot of chatter from crows. We could eventually see crows/ravens flying off and landing from a small clearing obscured by some bushes and small pine trees. I instantly thought there was a dead deer or elk from winter that had been revealed in the spring thaw. So out comes the bear spray just in case we startled someone mid-snack, which in hindsight is a dumb idea to attempt. We walk around the bushes and spot the crows and a bald eagle from the clearing, which was actually just a bunch of trees blown down from winter storms. As we walk over the trees, scanning the ground, we notice a pig's head on the forest floor. It wasn't covered by any brush, it seemed like it was placed there. I took a closer look and chalked it up to a dead boar. Some animal was unalived or found and just left the head behind. We kept on walking down the nearest trail, with the bear spray still out, into some second-generation pine forest with the hair standing up on our necks. We turned a corner and saw a wooden structure the shape of a teepee. My get the duck out meter was peaking despite me trying to rationalize everything. We double-timed it out of there. I regularly walked on a hiking trail that spanned the town I lived in. You never heard anything but wind blowing through the trees and birds chirping. One day as I was walking, I heard this creepy growl coming from this weird-looking tree/bush about 10 feet away from me. I couldn't see behind it because it was covered in grassy vegetation. It didn't sound like an animal, it sounded evil. I didn't walk the trail for a while after that, but I eventually did again, and as I walked by the same spot, I looked for that distinctive tree thing, but it was gone. It's hard to say just one, but I think, despite my numerous paranormal experiences out there, the scariest was getting stalked by another man on the Blue Ridge Parkway for about 3 days. Male, 36. For context, I was 24 at the time and working as a wilderness guide in WNC, and I was on an 8-day off shift. I didn't have a permanent home at the time, so I'd spend my off time living out in the mountains off the parkway. On this occasion, I was in camp late at night, sitting by my fire when a man, who was roughly my age or possibly a bit older, walked into camp. He said he was hiking the section of the mountain to sea trail that runs along the parkway. He said he pushed further than intended that day, and could he share camp? I allowed it, and we chatted casually before sleep. I woke up and he was gone. I piddled around for a few hours and then hiked back up to the parkway where my truck was. I got into my truck and drove about 30 miles down the parkway before hiking into another site located about a mile from the truck. That night, he showed up again and made a big show of pretending it was a coincidence. Now, hiking 30 miles in a day through the mountains is no small feat, but since I am a fast hiker and he was carrying an ultralight pack, it was entirely plausible. I gave him permission to share camp again, but I was a bit wary. The next morning he was gone before sunrise again. I decided to test him. I hiked back to my truck and reversed course, going back the way I'd come from, and parked on the side of the parkway by a trailhead. But then, instead, I crossed the parkway, hid in a rock escarpment, and waited. Sure enough, a couple of hours later I see an SUV pull up behind my truck, and the guy gets out with his backpack, so clearly not actually a through hiker. He had been tracking me by my very distinctive sticker collection on the tailgate of my truck. I watched him hike down the trailhead where he'd assumed I went to camp, and once I got a chance, I got back in the truck and reversed course again. I drove until I thought he'd give up, and then I went and set camp. That night he shows up again, and I don't let on that I know his game now. We share a meal, and I get in my hammock. At about 3 a.m. I wake up, and this guy is kissing the side of my face while I'm sleeping. Something you never expect to happen as a man. But fortunately I am a man. Not a small one either. I cracked him in the head with my elbow and jumped out of my hammock, at which point he went for my long knife on my side. Fortunately for me again, I wrestled in high school and have self-defense training specifically for close quarters. We grappled briefly before I managed to get behind him and render him unconscious. Once he slumped, I bound his hands and feet and dragged his ass to a tree and tied him to it. Then I hiked out and found his truck, which was right behind mine. I slid all his tires and took my happy ass to Asheville, lol. I heard two voices screaming for help. Back in July I was driving down to Tennessee from Michigan. I had to stop to get gas at a gas station in Walton, Kentucky, off of Mary Grubb's highway. It was pretty quiet, and while I had my door open, I heard an old man's voice and a child's voice screaming help me multiple times, as if they were being ended. I didn't respond or try to investigate, since I am a 5 feet 2 inches female and can't really do anything, because I have heard a lot of stories about trafficking and ways they try to lure you in. After I spoke to one of my friends in TN about the incident, he told me about the Appalachian horror stories. Later that day I went down a rabbit hole watching a bunch of videos on them, I should not have done. About 2 weeks later, another friend of mine came to visit on campus, and while we were sitting at the pool, she stared into the woods and saw a very tall, skinny white man just standing straight and looking down at the floor. I just told her to stop looking and asked to leave, but she didn't really know about these horror stories and looked again, and the man was not there. Lamau, I'm not sure what I need as a response, but I just thought it would be nice to share since I have been freaking out for half a year and can't stop thinking about it. A friend and I went on a walk in the woods by my grandma's old place, late in the evening. It was a very familiar and well-worn trail, but it was rare that I went in the woods at night. It always felt off, somehow. My grandma's dog came with us, though she spent the walk patrolling the immediate area. Close, but out of sight. The woods were very much part of her territory, so that much was normal. Night had fallen by the time we were heading back. There was just enough light to distinguish the trail from everything else, so we didn't bother with a flashlight. Partway back, a silhouette emerged from the trees immediately in front of us, not making a sound. We froze, holding our breaths as it sniffed the ground, turned, and walked away. We watched it head down the trail and out of sight. We told ourselves it was the dog being weird and laughed it off. We took a few steps forward, and the dog emerged from the trees almost the same distance ahead as the silhouette had just a minute prior. That startled us even more but also made it very obvious that whatever we'd seen before was not, in fact, the dog. The thing was much bigger and much bulkier and had been too dark to make out any detail at all. The behavior was canine enough, but it hadn't made any noise as it walked through the underbrush or leaf litter. Now, my grandma's dog was both territorial and protective. Most larger animals avoided that section of the woods because of her, and nothing should have gotten that close to us if she were nearby enough to startle us so soon after. We damn near sprinted out of the woods, and to this day I have no idea what it is that we actually saw. True story. I once went fishing near a forest at a creek, pretty close to a nature reserve. I had been fishing for about 2 hours when I noticed someone yelling "hey" multiple times, with a few seconds in between. At first I thought it was just an owl, but it sounded very human and was spaced out like a person calling. So I responded with, "Hello?" After a few seconds of dead silence, no forest noises or anything other than a few splashes in the creek, it replied with, "Come here." It could have just been because I was paying closer attention, but it sounded slightly closer. The only issue was that this particular creek had absolutely nothing behind it for miles except woods and a few swamps. It was starting to get dark. What's even stranger is that whoever, or whatever, it was never yelled again. I got extremely paranoid that someone was watching me, and every muscle in my body told me to grab everything and leave. It was the longest trip back to my car, and terrifyingly, it was through a small portion of the wood. I was living on Vancouver Island in Canada 6 years ago. I had a music festival coming up on the weekend of February 1st and the preceding week off because work was really slow. None of my friends were free, so I decided to go backpacking solo on a nearby trail Tuesday to Thursday, followed by the festival all weekend. Pretty great week, I figured. Covered a lot of ground Tuesday and Wednesday. Had one short day of hiking left, so I decided to have a fire Wednesday evening and make a night of it. I will preface the following events with the fact that I smoked a joint and drank 6 ounces or so of whiskey. Feel free to doubt my lucidity, because I sure do. Anyway, I had a nice fire going until 11 p.m. and had no neighbors camping on the same beach as me. I took a walk up the beach as my fire burned down and was just singing songs to myself as I polished off my whiskey. I sat down and was staring over the ocean at the stars. I noticed one star in particular was brighter than the rest. The more I stared at this star, the more weird things I noticed about it. For starters, it seemed to be subtly changing color. It would be bright white and then shift slightly blue, green, or red. It also seemed to be swaying slightly, barely noticeable at first but more pronounced the longer I stared. Eventually it appeared to be doing a small figure 8 in the sky. When I noticed this, I started thinking it was an aircraft, drone, or satellite of some kind. I sat, kind of crunk, staring at it until 11:46. This was the last time I checked my watch. I stood up and started walking down the beach to my camp, ready for bed. I glanced back at the star, craft, or whatever it was while walking and noticed that it was following me down the beach. It wasn't just moving perpendicular to me, it was moving closer at a diagonal. As it got closer to me, the light it emitted got dimmer and dimmer, until it wasn't shining at all. I could make out what looked like dark green metallic plating on it when it got quite close. At this point I'm pretty freaked out. I can hear a swishing noise coming from it, kind of like a strong wind in trees, but it was a very calm night. I started running until I got to my fire. I turned to look at it. It was 15 meters or so away, right in front of me. I just stood there, dumbfounded, staring at this thing, afraid to move or yell at it. I just stood there. After what felt like an eternity, it slowly started moving away from me. I was counting my blessings when, 30 meters or so out, it stopped. It then got very bright very quickly, and that's the last thing I remember. I came to as the sun crested the horizon in front of me. I was leaning on a log next to my burnt-out campfire. It was 6 in the morning. I was absolutely frozen, shaking and super confused. I had at least 5 hours completely unaccounted for. I got out of there as quickly as I could. That festival I'd been looking forward to? I attended for 2 hours but was unable to come to terms with what had occurred, so I departed that evening and drove 2.5 hours home. I began researching alien abductions and became quite paranoid, to the extent that it significantly impacted my life. I have since come to the conclusion that it was a waking nightmare, and honestly, I believe it is preferable this way. Ignorance is bliss. Montreal, Canada, Mount Royal Forest, whistling at night while biking. We are visiting Montreal for the first time, and we fell in love with the Bixie bike. E-biking around town was so fun, so after a night out we decided to bike home. The entire city was pretty quiet at this point but more peaceful than scary. Our friend leading us back to the Airbnb suddenly takes off the main road/bike lanes. We are driving past this beautiful giant statue of an angel and into the forest. I'm already nervous when I see we are headed for the forest, but suddenly it closes off the main road entirely, and we're surrounded by trees with no external light. Our bikes flicker briefly to give us some light. My friend and I are both scared at this point, and that's when I think I hear screaming. My friend freaks out vocally, and that only works me up, and we nearly crash multiple times. My friend starts screaming, "It's whistling." And I am unsure, maybe it's a bird. As we were trying to calm down, we heard it whistle again. Now I'm scared because that's a human whistle. My friend, whose lead is now quiet, keeps assuring me that we are almost out of the park. I actually thought I was in a nightmare. We were in a pitch-black forest, relying only on the small flickering lights from our bikes to find our way out. I tried to shut my brain off and follow my extremely calm friend. We eventually made it out biking as fast as possible, so scared we almost rode off the cliff. I've never felt this scared in my life. I was wondering if anyone has ever experienced this in these woods, particularly. I live in Missoula, Montana, and have seen every animal while in the woods, excluding wolverines and lynx. Just behind town up Miller Creek, we were coming back from a huge bonfire with a large group of friends. It had just started raining really hard, and as I eased the lifted F-150 down the skinny, steep logging road, out of nowhere this thing galloped in front of my truck's grill just inches away. It was as tall as the hood of my truck, had matted gray and black hair, and turned its head away from us to avoid the lights, I suppose. Then just as quickly it jumped off the road and down a super steep and rocky chute filled with small shrubs. Several things were not making sense. First is its height. It was long, but it was tall enough to clear the truck's hood. The creature passed by, its fur was a little too long for a wolf and appeared blotchy. The weirdest part was its head. I never saw its face, but the creature's head appeared square, with ears positioned high and behind it, yet smaller than what would be expected for its head size. Why the hell it decided to jump in front of a moving truck in pouring rain and right into my grill and headlights makes no sense. Certainly the truck looked too big to be prey, among other reasons. After it rolled off the insanely steep side of the mountain, going way too fast to be able to control the change from the road, my buddy and I just looked at each other, and I said, "Did you see that?" To which he replied, "Yup." It was so odd we just drove in silence for a minute before starting to discuss what it might have been. I want to say it was a wolf because that animal most closely resembled what we saw, but there were many aspects, from the head to the fur to the height to the gait, that didn't add up. We both still are not sure what it was, but it was truly odd and unsettling the way it went after the truck, ran by, and then off into the void. The green being in the window. In the late 90s, when I was about 12 years old, I went to a summer camp at Robbers Cave in Oklahoma. Our cabin was filled with bunk beds in a big open space. I had a top bunk. One of the nights I was there, I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night to a sound outside of the window. My head lay opposite from the window so that when I sat up, I was staring directly outside into the woods. Through the glass I saw a glowing green object in the shape of a person. I couldn't see a face, but I could feel it staring at me. The ordeal lasted for what seemed like a minute of us staring at one another. I remember I began feeling sick to my stomach, and the next thing I remember is waking up the next morning. I've tried looking at this as rationally as I can, so I figure now maybe it was a dream I confused with reality or something, but it felt and still feels so real to me. The experience was so unsettling that I have since had recurring dreams about this green glow. But that first time felt so real. Anyone else experience anything like this? Something circling my cabin. So, my family has owned a cottage in northern Ontario for more than 50 years, and last summer something seriously creepy happened to me up there, and I was hoping for any explanations. Our cottage is quite small, so my cousins and I sleep in a separate bedroom that we built outside, which we call the Bunkie. I woke up before my cousins and thought I heard someone walking towards the Bunkie, but when the sound didn't stop, and it was the sound of shod feet treading on our loose stone driveway, I realized that someone was actually circling the Bunkie. It was light out, and from my bed I could see out the window, and so I was just waiting, totally petrified in fear, for someone's head to pop up as they circled, but no head popped up. I don't know if I'm just paranoid, but I was so afraid and just felt so exposed, like nothing I had ever felt out there. The sound didn't stop for a long time, and honestly, I didn't mean to scare my younger cousin who was asleep beside me, so after mustering up some courage, I crawled onto the floor and grabbed my phone to call my dad. My cousin woke up at this point, and I told her what was going on, and my dad came out. My cousin didn't hear anything and was not afraid. My dad looked around a bit but told me it was probably just an animal. But animals have pretty soft feet, right? So how could it have sounded like shoes circling? It could have been a deer, but why would a deer be circling our Bunkie? And how come I didn't see it out the window? I don't know, I would appreciate any answer. Honestly, I believe in the paranormal and respect folklore, so I'm open to any logical explanation you may have. Why did I hear children laughing in the woods? When I was 16, my friend and I went about a half hour or more deep into the woods. It was just about to get dark. We were just hanging out and talking when we heard children laughing. Like approximately 5-6-year-old children. This was not a forest with a campsite. There's no way children were there. We both heard and acknowledged the laughing at the exact same time, so to me that rules out auditory hallucinations or one person thinking they heard something and freaking out the other one. We were not feeling paranoid prior to hearing the laughing. Neither of us had a phone or other technology handy. We both heard a group of young children laughing close by at the exact same time. We never saw anyone else in the woods. We played it off like it was no big deal and calmly left the woods. Once we exited the woods, we dropped the brave face and allowed ourselves to express how genuinely terrified we were. Is there any sort of explanation for this? During a camping trip with friends years ago, we witnessed something we can't explain. We were sitting around the fire deep in the forest off a logging road in British Columbia. We weren't drinking or smoking, as it was a dry trip for a friend. I noticed my good friend go silent and perk up like he was listening. He asked us to shut up and listen. The forest was dead quiet, like zero noise. Before there were frogs and birds and regular forest sounds. He said something like, "Guys, there could be a cougar or bear around. The forest is silent. We might want to move to the cars." Before anyone could react in the far tree line, maybe 100 feet away, we saw something that completely put all of us in shock. It was a small red orb, glowing like fire, producing its own light and going between the trees. We just watched it flabbergasted. It was clearly passing behind and in front of trees. It lasted maybe 20 seconds and then slowly faded. After about 10 seconds, the forest sounds resumed. We all just sat there like, WTF is that? We took a very quick look, and there was no road or anything. It couldn't have been cars or whatever. We were so freaked out that we left and found a campsite where other people were staying. Ducking crazy. We still bring it up from time to time when we get together. It gave me nightmares for weeks after. No clue what it could be. It's 50-50, people believe it when we talk about it. A couple of additional points before more. We are all experienced campers and have done these trips for years. We've heard weird sounds and seen bright flashes in the sky and encountered some sketchy people out in the bush before. Nothing unexplained, but just wild stuff, so we know how to react and think in these situations. The friend who noticed the lack of sound first is in the bush almost 6 months out of the year, as he does forestry for work, so he knows the woods more than anyone. He was terrified to go back to work for months after this experience. He never wanted to talk about it or mention it, as he said it made his hair stand up. So more about the light experience. When I say the forest was dead quiet, I mean completely quiet. I could hear the fire crackle lightly, but that was it. It was like the air was sucked out of the forest itself. I could hear my heart beating. To go from so much sound to nothing instantly kicked my fight or flight in. It was primal, something in the back of my head was like, this is a bad situation. Then, seeing that red light, it flickered and shone like a glass ball, about the size of a beach ball filled with fire. It was too far away to see clearly, but that's what it was like. Not a light shining. It produced its own light, a faint glow passed onto the trees as it passed. It was traveling at about walking speed in between the trees. It was a heavily bushed area, so you'd hear someone walking through. Once my eyes locked onto it, my stomach turned, I felt fear like I never experienced. I'll say this, I almost died a couple of years back, and that wasn't as scary as that light. It was like my brain was trying to figure it out but couldn't. Once it faded and the forest sounds returned, everything in my body said run, run. We barely said anything to each other as we all got up. We exchanged a few like, what the duck was that? Did you see that? We all confirmed what we saw. There were 6 of us. We decided to get a closer look, I guess, out of the hopes there would be an explanation. There wasn't. We couldn't explain it. That made it worse. We left and found a paid campsite about 20 to 30 minutes away. It was probably 1 a.m. In the morning the owner came by and touched base with us. People don't usually show up that late. We explained what happened, sort of jokingly, as it just seemed so strange. Her ducking face went stone. She explained that the forest we were in is extremely old growth. Which makes sense, my province has some of the oldest forests still standing in the world. She said it's not uncommon to hear stories like that. Asked a bunch of questions and then said it could be something aboriginal, evil spirits, or something else entirely. I have no idea what or why it happened, I don't know what we saw, but it was there. We have on multiple occasions talked about it. Whenever we do, I get nightmares. Even just talking about this and writing this out gives me the creeps. Heard voices filing past my truck while I was camping in Nantahala National Forest near Davis, West Virginia. Woke up to what sounded like 10 to 15 people, a mix of men, women, and children, walking down the road having hushed conversations. It seemed like they knew I was there and were trying not to wake me, talking too low to understand what they were saying. There was also an orange glow coming through the fog. Figured they were hikers marching down to a trailhead, and the glow was the sun coming up. When I looked at my phone, though, I saw that it was just a little after 3 a.m. Also saw that the light was moving, like lanterns or torches being carried. Also realized that there were no trails in that direction. This obviously startled me, and I sat up suddenly in my cot. The sudden movement must have shaken the truck a little because the voices all hushed and went silent. I sat there in the silence as the light also slowly faded out. Did not go back to sleep and left as soon as the sun actually did come up. I've since camped there again many times without incident. Unexplained camping in Custer-Gallatin National Forest. So last summer, my brother had something very off-putting happen while camping with friends. We've talked about it with our other brother about the almost paranormal events that took place. He was camping with friends off of the Boulder River Road in Custer-Gallatin National Forest. Almost to where the road ends near the top of the mountain. He was near the river and could hear it from the back of his truck. He had a cover over the bed, which he would camp in, as well as wildlife. At one point the forest around him went completely silent. The biggest thing he noticed was that he couldn't hear the river or any wildlife. Just complete silence. Note that they were 45 miles from the nearest ranger station down the mountain. His two friends were about a football field length away camping in two tents by the fire pit. It was at the end of the night that my brother walked back to his truck to sleep in the covered bed. He noticed what looked like red lights in the distant trees, not near the road that his truck was parked off of. At one point the truck begins to shake. He felt the urge to go outside to investigate, but he fought it. He just lay down and prayed for it to end. At some point he fell asleep and woke up in the morning. He asked his friends if anything weird happened to them, and they said no. They let the fire slowly go out and went to bed. He told him the story, and it was laughed off. My brother told us the story, and we joked about skinwalkers and other lore. Shortly after the camping trip he started to have electrical problems. He took the truck to multiple mechanics, and no one could figure it out. The truck would randomly turn off and not start again. It wasn't until a week or two after the camping trip that he noticed scratches on the top of his truck. They looked like claw marks. I feel like if he had investigated outside of the truck, he would have mysteriously disappeared. We haven't talked about it in months until I was telling him about a bar having a grand reopening. When he looked up the bar on Google Maps, he noticed it was the same bar he passed on the way to the campsite. It was just under 50 miles before the campsite at the bottom of the mountain. We've looked up a lot of things, and nothing explains what happened. Has anyone had anything happen to them in Custer-Gallatin National Forest? My buddy and I were doing a weekend backpacking trip near the Finger Lakes in upstate New York. This was only my second backpacking trip at the time, so I was pretty inexperienced. We get a few miles into the trail and reach this scenic viewpoint. Just gorgeous. Up there was a man and his dog. We get chatting for a bit, and my buddy and I agree this guy is just giving us off vibes. His questions went from innocent to trying to get odd information out of us. How long we'd be there, where we wanted to set up camp, if anyone else was with us, and the type of stuff. A bit off-putting, so we decided to boogie. We ended up setting up camp about 2 miles from there. Thankfully, we had no more run-ins with the guy. But later that night a scarier experience happened. As we were getting in the tent for bed, it was maybe 11 p.m. at this point. We're lying there for about 20 minutes, neither of us could sleep due to the man from earlier. I begin hearing what sounds like a song up in the ridge about 30 yards away. I couldn't really make out what kind of music, but it certainly had a rhythm to it. This went on for what felt like 30 minutes before my buddy asked, "Do you hear that?" To which I replied, "You mean the music?" He said yes. We got out of the tent to look around and saw nothing, no signs of anyone around, and when we got out of the tent, it seemed to stop. We stayed awake for about another hour and eventually fell asleep. I'm not sure what was making that noise exactly, but our camp was next to a running river and a waterfall, and the music was certainly louder than both of those things. I was in the Mount Shasta area in 2019 at a lake called Devil's Lake. My friend and I were passing nearby, on a road trip, and decided to go on a hike. We got maybe 30 minutes into the hike, around the lake, when all of a sudden the wind picked up and it started raining and hailing on us for about 1 minute. At that exact time, a figure emerged from the trees, off trail, about 75 yards away from us and was walking right up to us, head down and cloaked in shabby brown clothes. My friend and I just stood there in shock at what the duck was happening and waited for this person. We realized it was a woman around our age, 24, and she was wet from the sudden rain. She was short and stocky, maybe 5 feet 6 inches, and came right up to us and immediately hugged me. I thought she might be in trouble and offered to walk back to the parking lot with her. She said she got lost out there while tripping on DMT, a potent psychedelic drug. She offered to take us to a local cafe and was acting weird the whole time, probably from the drugs. She was being weirdly suggestive and wanting me to crack her back and stuff like that. We got to the cafe, and she asked what my biggest desire was. I told her something like to be a good person. Somehow we ended up in the back of my SUV making out, but that is all that happened. It was weird. Never saw her again, and my friend and I got really creeped out afterwards thinking about the strange coincidences that kept happening with her. I don't know if I encountered a witch at Mount Shasta, but it was certainly a strange experience. Unexplained sounds. This weekend, I was bow hunting in southwest Georgia, deep in a swamp bottom, approximately 3/4 of a mile through brush from the nearest clearing or road. Just before dark, I began to hear rustling in a thicket 20 yards to my right. Being optimistic and wanting to avoid going home empty-handed, I sat later than I really should have, considering it was the first time anybody had been down in that part of the swamp in 4 years and the trail was unclear. I have spent my entire life in those woods and am familiar with strange sounds, such as the occasional fox and random trees falling. However, this particular sound has been on my mind ever since. About 10 minutes after dark I heard what sounded like 3 turkey clucks, 2 dry heaves, 2 owl hoots, and 1 whistle in direct succession as loud as a coyote howl from the thicket where the rustling was coming from. I did the sensible thing and got out of there. However, I have not been able to figure this sound out. If anyone has any guesses, please let me know. This is a very low traffic area on private property, and the only people that knew where I was hunting were hours away, meaning it's not just someone I know trying to mess with me. The woods are just spooky. The story of the winter, though, was always the one that stuck out to me. My friends and I like to go camping when there is a lot of snow out because it's just different and really isn't too bad as long as you know how to pack for snow and properly layer. Another reason we enjoy camping in the winter is that there are so few people around, which allows us to shoot guns with fewer complications. With that, I'll explain what happened. 2 of my friends, whom we will refer to as C and D, and I went out to find a place to park our vehicles and hike a short distance in the snow to locate a camping spot on a mountain just past the southern part of Rimrock Lake, slightly beyond the airport. We find a spot that is clear of snow that snowmobilers use to park their trucks and unload their snowmobiles. From there we see a trail that doesn't look like it has deep snow, so we decide to go down it a bit and see if we can get closer to the mountain since it would be a lot less walking. We make it about halfway there, and both D's Jeep and my truck get stuck, and we can't get them out at all. We decide to go up the mountain a bit and see if we can get cell service so we can call D's uncle since we knew he owned a recovery rig he built for the snow. We go up, bringing our rifles with us, and we come to a clearing with some piles of wood pallets. D's phone gets service, and he calls his uncle and says he can come help us out but probably won't be until morning since he's out of town that day. We tell him it's fine since we were staying the night anyway. So while we were just hanging out, we decided to staple some paper targets to the pallets to shoot it since it was a good area with a backstop. We shot for about 30 minutes and heard a scream, but it sounded pretty far away. C doesn't really camp that often, so he was commenting on how weird it was, and D and I were like, probably just snowmobilers ducking around or something, even though we didn't see anyone near us at all. We keep going until it starts to get dusk, and we hear it again, and it sounds closer. We all kind of looked at each other, acknowledging that it was weird, and decided to head down to where the vehicles were stuck and set up camp there since D forgot his sleeping bag in the Jeep. We start walking down again, and the scream happens but in the opposite direction. We start to move a little bit quicker down the hill and get to our vehicles, where we start setting up tents and everything. We were in the middle of setting up our tents when the scream occurred again, and it sounded extremely close. We all stop and look at each other. We decide to grab our rifles and look around. At this point it's pretty dark, so we really couldn't see much, but C and I had weapon-mounted flashlights on our rifles, so we just turned them on and started scanning the area but didn't see anything out of the ordinary. After that we didn't hear it again. The next day, D's uncle came out and pulled us out of the snow. We tell him the story. He's been going there for like 30 plus years, and he says very nonchalantly, "Yeah, that shit happens. I don't know what it could be, but that's why I just bring a high-power rifle, lol." I heard screams like that before, but I always thought it was just people partying in the woods since it always happened in the spring/summer. The occurrence of screams in the winter, when there are feet of snow, felt spooky because very few people camp in that area during that season. Since that experience, I have begun to reconsider whether the sounds I heard were merely the result of people celebrating in the woods or if there might be another explanation. I don't know what it is, but it's odd, and as I said before, I just chalk it up to the woods being spooky. When I was a kid, I used to spend my summers in my grandparents' summer home, which is located precisely in the middle of Mountainville, nowhere. There is no gravel road access to the house. Instead, you must trek through dense bush on a steep incline to reach it. Because I was a kid, one who had no inkling of what the internet was, I loved everything about it: endless exploration, rock climbing, and other danger-seeking opportunities. Convincing my grandfather to build me and my cousin a treehouse. Eating the best food known to man. Swapping scary stories by a campfire. Everything was awesome. Everything except that one time I came across a random well in the middle of the woods. Wells can be quite eerie, but I believe this one stands out as the most unsettling. It resembled something that would be found in a medieval fantasy horror narrative, featuring a very tall, pointed thatched roof, part of which had collapsed, a base constructed of gray, moss-covered, misaligned stones, and even a wooden bucket. At the time, I did not find the presence of the bucket unusual, as wells are typically depicted with buckets in images. However, upon reflection, the bucket was remarkably clean, crafted from a smooth, glossy wood that showed no signs of wear. So that was weird. I remember stumbling upon this well, and instead of being absolutely thrilled to explore it like my recklessly curious child self would have been, I felt sick. Like, physically nauseous. I couldn't stand to look at the thing without just feeling gross. I had zero desire to go near it. I did go near it because curiosity won out in the end, and I wanted to have a story to tell my cousin. We were always trying to outdare the other, so I went up to it and looked down. Man, I kid you not, this thing had stairs in it. Shiny wooden spiral stairs leading down to who knows where. For some reason, this scared the piss out of me, and I hightailed it out of there right quick. I never told my cousin because I know he would have wanted to go and find it and climb down, and the idea of doing that honestly made me feel like crawling out of my skin. Still does, just thinking about it. Anyway, the real scary part about it is that this random ass well started popping up and still pops up in my dreams from time to time. It suddenly appears in the middle of any dream I'm having. To this day. I'm an adult now, and it still scares the life out of me. To be honest, I don't believe in the supernatural, but I don't think I'll ever be able to overcome this instinctual fear of going down this well, whether in a dream or otherwise. Sound in the woods. Hi, I need to tell this story to someone, and maybe someone on the internet can describe what my girlfriend and I experienced. It was around 4 p.m. when we suddenly decided to go to a waterfall we had seen online. We live in Santa Catarina, Brazil. The name of the waterfall was Morro de Fatima Waterfall, and we were following the map. We went there by motorcycle, and it was already getting close to dark. When we were about 12 minutes away by bike, we decided to continue on foot because the motorcycle couldn't handle the terrain. We walked for about 24 minutes along a path that split to the left and right. We checked the map and chose the left path. It was getting darker, and I started to find several mushrooms I had never seen before. We were also seeing signs of water and smooth stones like the ones you find near waterfalls. We walked another 15 minutes and went far past the waterfall. We had taken the wrong path, but we decided to keep going. My girlfriend, I don't know if she has some kind of spiritual sensitivity, but whenever something is about to go wrong, she feels it beforehand. We kept going until we found a yellow sign that simply said danger. It sounds like a joke, but it's not. I decided to climb a bit higher to see if I could spot anything. It was already getting very dark, and my girlfriend was starting to panic. After I had gone about 30 steps up, we heard a sound coming from all directions at once. It wasn't an animal, and it definitely wasn't human. She went into complete panic and started to run. I didn't feel afraid at first because I wanted to understand what the sound was, but I decided to calm her down and go back down with her. I'm a very rational person, but that loud sound felt like some kind of presence warning us to leave. At the same time, a strong wind seemed to come from every direction. We ran away, and when we got home, we tried to look up animal sounds similar to what we had heard, but we couldn't find anything. It's hard even to describe, and it didn't match any animal. I took photos of the type of mushroom I found and the forest we entered. This happened a week ago, and to this day I feel like it was something very strong on a spiritual level. I've never felt anything like that before. The curiosity I felt in such an obviously dangerous situation was strange. I felt like I left my body for a moment because the sound was so intense. I feel like going back there earlier in the day, but my girlfriend will never allow it. I feel like if nature didn't want us to continue, we should respect that, but I would like to understand why we couldn't go any further. Back in the 90s, I lived in Idaho and would head off into the backcountry as my relaxation method. This particular time, I was about 5 miles out in the river of no return wilderness and decided to camp on a knoll that had amazing views. I set up camp, made dinner, watched the stars, and then curled up in my bag for the night. Around 2 or 3 a.m., I heard something in the woods roughly 75 yards behind me. I lay there a minute to catch my bearings when I heard a child's voice say, "Hi," loudly. I knew there was nobody else out there. I got out of my bag and said, "Hi back." It felt like a fool, but I did it. Nothing. And I wasn't going into the woods, not in the dark. I got the fire going again, made some coffee, and waited until dawn. Wandered all over that bluff but found no evidence of humans. My dogs were barking at something in my yard. Hi, I'm from Mexico. Maybe my story isn't the scariest one out there, but even today I still can't explain what I saw that night. This happened about 4 years ago. I live in a house very close to a forest. The front of my house has a large gate, and both sides of the property are surrounded by walls. The back of the property is the only area that connects directly to the forest. I also have several dogs, all of them Labradors, so they are not small dogs. One night, around midnight, I woke up because all of them started barking at the same time. It wasn't normal barking. They sounded aggressive and alert, like when they sensed something strange nearby. At first I thought maybe one of them had been left outside the gate, so I decided to go check. I opened the door and stepped outside into the yard. It was very dark. When I turned my head to the right, I saw all my dogs standing together. They were facing the same direction and barking nonstop, like they were surrounding something. At first I couldn't see what they were barking at. But after a few seconds, when my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed something standing between them. It looked like a dog. Or at least something shaped like one. The strange thing is that my dogs are Labradors, and this thing was still much bigger than them. Easily twice their size. Even in the darkness I could still see my dogs clearly, but that animal was different. It was so black that I couldn't distinguish its features. I couldn't see its eyes, its face, or even the shape of its body clearly. It looked more like a shadow standing among my dogs. At some point I made a small noise without realizing it. The thing slowly lifted its head and looked directly at me. As soon as it noticed me, it suddenly tried to climb over one of the walls of my house, like it wanted to escape. It jumped toward the wall but couldn't get over it while my dogs kept barking like crazy. I ran back inside the house in fear to get my phone so I could use the flashlight. But just as I was about to go outside again, I heard something that made the situation even stranger. All of my dogs suddenly started barking like they were chasing something and running toward the forest at the back of the property. Their barking slowly faded as they ran farther away. And then suddenly everything went completely silent. No crickets. No wind. Nothing. That silence honestly scared me more than the creature I had just seen. So I decided to stay inside and close the door. A while later my dogs came back, and none of them were injured, even though they had chased that thing toward the forest. To this day I still wonder what I saw that night. In Mexico there is a well-known belief about creatures called nahuales. People say they are witches who can transform into animals and move around during the night. Maybe it was one of them, or maybe it was something else. Something that came out of the forest that night and somehow ended up inside my yard. It feels like something followed me home from a silent place. This might sound insane, but I've sat with this for weeks and I can't keep brushing it off. About a month ago, I went on a short solo trip to a remote forest area in North India. There's a spot known among locals as the Silent Patch, where there are no birds and no insects. I only found it by accident while hiking off trail. The second I entered that area, I felt this intense pressure, like my thoughts had weight. The silence wasn't peaceful. That's the only way I can describe it. I didn't stay long. Maybe 5 minutes, took a photo, nothing weird in it, got uncomfortable, and left. But since coming back, weird things keep happening, like electronics in my house, especially my phone and laptop, randomly shutting off for no reason when I talk about that place even over the phone with someone. My dog refuses to enter my bedroom and whines outside it at night. I keep waking up at 3:33 a.m., and for the past week I've seen the same figure in my dream, tall, still, standing in the corner, just watching. I've tried rationalizing this. Maybe I'm just imagining it. But last night, I heard something knock on my window at exactly 3:33. I live on the 3rd floor. There are no signs of forced entry. Nothing on the CCTV. But something's not right. I don't feel alone in my house anymore. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Having spent a crazy amount of time in nature, I don't get creeped out easily. But there is one property I've tried to explore a few times and had the most unsettling feelings while on it. I will never go on it again. Something feels bad there. It's large old hunting acreage that has been logged at least once, at least 40 years ago. There are rusty orange gates at each end. The first time I walked in was from the north. I started walking through the tangle of picker bushes, and about a half-mile in, I found a fresh bloody ribcage in the middle of the trail. No signs of animal trails. I noped out of there. I figured maybe a raptor dropped it as someone was baiting predators, coyote hunters, nearby, but it was still disturbing. Being a determined idiot, I decided to approach from the south. I wanted to find the hunting camp on the property. It was 6 months later, a nice spring day. The further I get into the property, the more bothered I feel. It's not like I'm being watched, but there's just a sense of this is bad energy screaming at me. I shake it off and keep going. I cross a sketchy broken ATV bridge to get to this abandoned camp with stuff scattered all over the yard. It looks like no one's been there in at least 5+ years, but everything is in weirdly excellent condition. The creepy sense gets worse, and I'm like, I need to get the duck out of here. There's no clear way out. To this day, I have no clue how these people used to access this building. The gates were rusted shut. No driveway from the south and no obvious path north. I go up what looks like a driveway, and it just leads deep into a swamp that gets ominously dark, freaking me out. Finally, I see light through the trees to the east. I bust through into a freshly logged area adjacent to the property and get the duck out of there. The sense of doom or whatever went away as soon as I left the property. I'm not superstitious, but duck that place. I don't know if someone was ended there or what happened, but some bad ducking juju is tied to that land. We heard it coming, potential near encounter in southern Washington to set things up. I am 19 and female, and my boyfriend is 26, both have extensive experience in the woods. I hiked across the PCT from Ashland to the Bridge of the Gods at the border of Washington, and that took 6 weeks. I've always enjoyed the outdoors, and I've never felt unsafe even when getting close to wildlife such as bears. My boyfriend grew up in a rural area surrounded by farmland, so he's also comfortable with the outdoors. We decide to go camping at a lake, which is about 45 minutes away from Yakima, Washington, and this region of Washington has an abundance of Native American land, history, and Native people, of course. I am not sure if it's relevant, but I thought I'd add it. We end up getting to the lake at about 10:45 p.m. As we pull into the entrance, I immediately get a bad feeling. I have only felt something like this a handful of times in my entire life. I tell my boyfriend basically, this place is giving me a bad vibe, man, and he says I'm just scared of the dark, utterly dismissing my feelings. As we round a curve, I'm struck with the reality that I've had a dream about this place, his car, a Crown Victoria, the specific shape of the road, and the light from his headlights. It wasn't déjà vu. It was reminiscent of a dream I had when I was approximately 12 years old. I tell my boyfriend, I've dreamt about this place. Everything about it. I go into more detail than that, but you get the idea. In my dream, there was a pale, creepy face with reflective eyes staring at me through the trees, and I just remember running as fast as I could from it down the road. Again, he considers what I'm saying but ultimately disregards it. We pull up to the campsite and set up pretty fast. In about 15 minutes, we have our tent set up and a fire going, and my boyfriend has lit a cigar, as he is terribly addicted to those nasty things. As we sit around the campfire, he's puffing away, and suddenly we hear this wildly loud screaming. It sounded like a group of college kids screaming their drunken asses off, but it didn't sound quite right, if that makes sense. It sounded like men and women screaming in perfect unison, the high and low screams melding together. I instantly try to rationalize the strange sound. The sound was possibly a mile away, just over a hill. Moments later, we hear it again, but in the opposite direction, and it's ducking closer. At this point, the sound is likely only half a mile away. I swear to God it sounded more disturbing, realizing that sound is not human at all. I don't know if it was more distorted and alien or if the proximity allowed me to hear it better. We begin to quietly discuss how that sound is not normal. Neither of us, in all of our years of hiking and traveling, has ever heard something remotely like that. Moments later, the sound is not further than a football field away. My boyfriend puts his cigar down and grabs his gun, and we agree to ignore it and no longer speak of it for the rest of the night. We hop in our tent and wake up to a gorgeous sunny day. The next morning, we notice that his cigar was missing. We talked about it a bit that day, and it still freaks us out thinking about it. I believe that when it sounded far away, it was actually very close. These creatures have an ability to sound far away when, really, they're not far at all. I heard from some people that the farther they sound, the closer they are. I actually have had some spooky experiences camping in West Virginia. I was driving to Shenandoah but wanted to break up the drive, so I stopped to camp in Canaan Valley. I have a truck bed camper with a cot, so I was sleeping in that. Because I wasn't in a tent, I was in a spot that was much closer to the road than I would normally camp. During the night I woke up to voices walking past my truck. I could hear 2 men talking and then 2 women speaking to a child. They were using hushed tones and keeping their voices low as if they were trying not to wake me. I couldn't make out what they were saying but could hear them walking past. I opened my eyes and saw what looked like the orange light of dawn glowing in the fog. I took the voices to be fellow campers that were walking down the road to go hiking, but something seemed off. After this group passed, another group came right behind them, and then another, all using the same hushed tones. Eventually it sounded like some 15 to 20 people had filed past. I also slowly realized that there weren't any trails down that road, it just led deeper into the woods until it came to the backside of a state park some 10 or so miles later. Realizing something weird was going on, I opened my eyes again and saw that the dawn light in the fog was actually flickering and moving past, like people carrying torches or lanterns. This startled me, and I grabbed my phone to see that it was only a little past 3 a.m. This startled me more, and I sat up, shaking the truck. When I did this, all of the voices outside hushed up immediately. They shushed each other and then went silent. The light remained for a few more seconds before slowly fading out as I was trying to decide if I should investigate. Did not go back to sleep and left as soon as the sun actually rose. I live in a mountain town in Australia, with a national park forest wrapping around the town. About a year ago I had to leave the house at 4 a.m. for a road trip. I closed the door behind me and stepped onto my porch to walk about 20 meters to my car. As soon as the door closed, I felt something weird around me. It was silent. Utterly silent. No leaf rustling, no frog croaking, no distant truck or car, nothing. I turned my phone's light on and could only see to the edge of it, and it didn't dim. It was just a hard line between the white of where my light fell and the dark of night. I looked up for the night sky and saw nothing but black. I felt like I walked across a small brick path that was suspended in a void. I went to my car quickly and quietly, threw my bag on the back seat, and slipped in with a sigh of relief. As soon as I turned the car and its lights on, the feeling passed, and I could see the sky again. I have no idea what happened, and I know that silence in the forest is usually indicative of the presence of a predator passing through, but whatever that was, it was something else. Story: I originally grew up on a very isolated rural farm in the middle of nowhere. One year there was an abnormally cold winter and deep snowfall, and after spending days indoors feeling very housebound, I decided to brave the cold with the dogs and go for a long walk. We were walking across the pure virgin snow fields, crunching deep snow underfoot and occasionally following the trails of animals like deer. The dogs were having the best time, but after a couple of hours my feet began to feel numb, so I decided to head for a forested hill where I knew that the snow cover would be very thin and I could warm up a bit. After entering the woods, the area was very sheltered and desired ground that wasn't covered in snow. I began to head deeper into the woods. But then the strangest thing began to happen. Instead of feeling cold, I began to feel not just a little warmer, but very warm. I looked around me, and the sun was shining. I could hear birdsong in the air, and all the leaves on the trees were bright and green. Totally gone was the windswept snowy landscape. It was utterly bizarre. Stranger still, I found myself walking down a trackway that I couldn't recall ever seeing before in the woods on the farm. I could still hear the dogs bounding around and playfully barking in the distance, so I didn't pay them too much heed as I knew they weren't far and just continued walking down this trackway, trying to recall what it was and where it led to. Not only was the snowy landscape and minus temperatures completely gone at this point, but I was trudging through golden leaf litter, and the wide trackway appeared to have cartwheel tracks in it. Something told me I had traveled back into the past, like I had somehow walked into a random bubble of time from the 1800s, which I knew was crazy. But then I began to hear what sounded like a horse and cart actually traveling down the trackway in my direction. Then, suddenly, a car horn beeped. And in an instant, I found myself not in a golden leaf littered, cartwheel marked trackway on a warm autumnal day but standing at the edge of a very tall hill cliff overlooking a busy road, brambles trying to grow around my feet. I blinked and looked around, and the air was suddenly extremely cold again. The snow and depression had returned across the landscape, and if I had taken just a few more steps forward, I would have walked off the cliff and toward certain injury or death. I turned around, and the dogs were barking in distress at me, unable to come close because of how far into this dense patch of bramble thicket I was. I carefully navigated my way back out and traveled back home. When I finally got home, I was very weirded out by the whole experience, and after the snow eventually melted away, I tried going back up to that patch of wood to see if I could find the trackway. No luck, and I tried again and again over the following months to find it until one late spring day, when I finally found the location of the trackway. But while in my experience it had been a broad and well-used piece of road, this one was thin, terribly overgrown, and more like a badly maintained footpath, eventually disappearing into nothingness. When I asked local people about the strange track, though, I was told that it was far from being a mere footpath. Many years ago, some archaeologists had identified it as the remains of a major old Roman road that had once connected two settlements and the remains of a mysterious fort-like structure in the local area near the base of the hill. So make of it whatever you will. Either I got hypothermia and hallucinated a whole journey that never existed, or I briefly traveled back in time to a past moment on Roman Road during its heyday before being pulled back to reality by my barking dogs before I became lost for good. George Washington National Forest scare? Hey everyone. My husband and I are both avid outdoors people and wanted to do a camping trip for a mini vacation. We landed on GWNF. It took us a couple hours to drive to, but once we got there, the campsite we wanted to stay at was full. Weird because it's a weekday in early spring, but I totally understand. We had a backup plan and found one of the dispersed camping sites a couple miles down the road. When we first started setting up our tent, I had a very uneasy feeling that I chalked up to just being in a new place. I decided to check the immediate area out just to be safe. I did find what looked like a gravesite/memorial. It was very close to our camp. There was a small glass cross on it that looked very new, and someone had put a Merry Christmas message on the top of it. I brushed it off. I overall just had a very uneasy feeling during the day that I didn't mention to my partner, but we both discussed only camping the one day in this spot and finding a better one the next day. Truthfully, after a long drive, we were just hungry and ready to set up camp for the night, lol. We noticed our dog wasn't settling down during the day, but again, we tried brushing it off because he is a rescue and had never been camping before, so we just gave him lots of love and reassurance. Once the sun started going down, that's when things got worse. I felt like I was being watched, and I couldn't shake that feeling. My dog wouldn't stop staring in one direction towards the woods and wouldn't relax. He didn't bark or growl at any point. Just looked straight ahead and was scared. We shined lights around the area and never saw anything. Once the sun was fully down, I noticed my husband had his hand resting on the weapon we had brought, and I finally kind of hinted at being nervous. He immediately agreed and told me if I wanted to leave, we could pack up and head out ASAP. I went into a sort of freeze state at that point and felt like my body wouldn't move, probably just nerves, but it was a very scary feeling. My husband started to pack up our things without a word. When we went to put our dog in the car, we noticed his back legs were physically shaking in fear. To clarify, we didn't hear anything. No rustling, no animal noises, etc. I love to go birding, so during the day I heard bird songs but never saw any birds. Not sure of the relevance, but just wanted to mention that I found it odd. Once we got in the car and started driving, my husband admitted to being equally as nervous even during the daytime. He then told me he felt like he was being watched from every angle, and the dog was what made him feel it was a valid fear. He also told me he has never seen me that scared in the 10 years he's known me. This is the one part I can't vouch for. My husband made an audible noise driving and didn't talk for a couple minutes. Once we got out of the woods, he told me he saw 4 eyes and a flesh-like semicircle in the woods moving quickly. I didn't see it, so I can't speak to that. We both agreed we'd rather be wusses than dead. I'm not quite sure if we are overreacting, but we've both spent lots of time alone in other parts of Appalachia and have never felt that scared. Not sure if anyone has any insights into that area. We were staying near Elkhorn Lake. The strange things I found out in the middle of the desert. The first series of strange things was when my buddy and I were hiking a trail in southern Arizona. There was a series of small ridges surrounding the trail, so we decided to hike up one to check out the views of the area. We were walking on top of the ridge when we stumbled across a tattered backpack filled to the brim with rusted out food cans. There was some other random garbage that definitely indicated someone was staying up on this ridge for a long while. We became a bit cautious, but the stuff all looked like it had been left behind a while ago. We continue on our path towards the end of the ridge, where we will climb back down. When we came to the top, we found 2 more backpacks also filled completely with rusted cans. This time the scene was a bit different. In addition to the backpacks, there was a mesh canopy, like the kind the US Army would use in Afghanistan, set up covering a tarp with small smashed solar panels all over. Inside, facing down into the valley, were these big, telescopic binoculars. I really don't know why, but I picked up the binoculars and looked in the direction they were pointing. It was aimed straight at this fenced-in property out in the desert, and for some reason all of it kind of hit me at once. We have to get out of there now. We got back to our car and put that area behind us. The only things I can really think of are some normal person living out there, some border agent lookout post, or some cartel lookout post. Whatever the case, I wasn't interested in waiting around to find out. This next one is more intriguing to me than unsettling. On another hike that same trip, we were walking in an area south of Benson, Arizona. Along our walk we came across a sheltered body of water with trees growing around it. Kind of an oasis-looking deal. Immediately we noticed the area had big smashed speakers in addition to a crazy number of shotgun shells. There were small baggies and other garbage strewn about, and it was clear someone had a Desert Rager and brought every shotgun they owned lol. Hated to see all of the garage, but it was definitely a strange scene to stumble upon. This last one was startling at first but ended up being quite beautiful. Again, on the same trip we were doing some light bouldering and rock climbing. We got to the top of the formation we were climbing when we came face to face with a huge male mountain goat. Our eyes immediately locked onto its big horns as it stopped and locked its eyes onto us. If it decided to charge us, we could very well go right off of a small cliff, which would not be good. Moments later it began to hobble past us slowly. Its front left leg was injured, and it clearly didn't want to fight us. We stood as still as possible as it made its way wherever it was headed. Although it wasn't a threat, we were definitely tense until it was out of sight. Having worked with male goats, they are known to be a bit territorial. It may not have been so chill if he hadn't been injured. That's all. Thank you to those who made it this far. Strange encounter while hunting. So probably about a year ago my father and I were hunting in Webster County, West Virginia. It was bow season in fall. Usually we get one buck at our deer feeder, but this time my father and I were just waiting for some deer at our deer feeder, and all of a sudden, 3 bucks walk in all together. In the middle there was the 6-point buck, but for some reason the top of its head was white. We didn't shoot it. Instead, my father shot a 4-point. When we got the 4-point token taken care of, we discussed the white-headed buck. We could not figure out why the top of its head was white. When I was just out of high school, I had gone on a lake trip with a bunch of friends. Drinking, smoking cigars, and just general debauchery. The second night we were there, as we were hanging around the fire, we started to notice a weird sound coming from the opposite side of the lake. There was literally nobody around. We hadn't seen another person since we arrived at the campsite. One of the guys said it sounded like drums. 2 other guys and I decided we'd go exploring to see what it was. We walked about 2 miles around the lake. No paths, thick woods all around. We came to a slight opening in the trees and stopped. The sound had been getting louder and clearer the whole way. It was definitely the sounds of drums. Just a steady 1-2-3 beat. As we walked into the clearing, we saw a rock ledge jutting out of the ground. Nothing else around. This was weird in itself. But combined with the drumming coming from nowhere and the clearing that didn't make sense, we were cautious. It sounded like the drums were coming from the rock. We got to about 20 feet from the rock, and out of nowhere, the speed of the drums doubled. A massive wind came out of nowhere. I turned around to see the other 2 guys running away. I didn't even think, I chased after them. We ran all the way back to the camp. By the time we made it back, the wind was screaming and rain had started. It sounded like the entire forest was falling down around us. The other guys had been running around trying to get chairs, trash, and tarps all secured. Shit was flying everywhere. We all dived into the giant army-style tent we had set up just to try and keep it from blowing away. Once inside we told the other guys what had happened. They said about 45 minutes after we had left, the wind started. They had heard the drums increase tempo right before the wind started as well. We ended up hunkered down in the tent all night. The storm was insane. In the morning we decided to go back and see if there was any sign of the people who were drumming all night. We hiked back to the clearing with the rock. After 20 minutes of searching the area, we found nothing. No drums, no signs of people at all. We wandered around the entire area. There were no roads, trails, or clearings other than the one with the rock. Zero explanation for the sound. Whenever we got home, a friend did some research at the local library. Turns out the lake we were at was a stopping point on the Trail of Tears. There have been multiple reports of strange occurrences at that lake. I couldn't find any information about phantom drums, but the concept aligned with the strange occurrences. Haven't been back, and this was 20-something years ago. I used to work at an overnight camp where I spent 10 weeks a year, minimum, living in the woods. I love hiking and go as often as possible. Anyways, of course I think anyone who spends enough time outside has, but this can be due to a lot of things, not limited to but definitely including the uncanny valley effect. The one I can think of was one night, when I was leading a night hike. These are charming little hikes that take place shortly after dark, where participants lie in a large field starting at dusk, perform bat calls, and ensure their flashlights remain off throughout the duration, allowing their eyes to adjust to the darkness and relying primarily on moonlight to navigate carefully. A little background: camp had no streetlights, and all outer building lights were on automatic timers or manually turned off after a certain point by staff. Most camp lights were not even turned on, as there wasn't really a reason to unless the weather was bad. We communicated via walkie-talkies. All staff with kids were required to have at least one walkie per group. I had hours on this particular hike. As we followed our usual route, I was sharing my brief presentation about the nocturnal animals that inhabit the area. We arrived at a small pavilion where my favorite part of the hike takes place. Each person receives a mint, chooses a partner, and watches as their partner bites down on it. It gives a little spark you can see. I did not have a partner, so I was observing the group when, right before my eyes, I witnessed the spark. It was weird, but I figured it was just a trick of the light, so we started hiking back. On the trail, once I turned around as I was leading, I saw someone standing in the path, probably about 100 feet ahead. The kids saw the person too, as they asked who it was, excitedly expecting it to be part of the hike. I said it was my coworker, who was off camp for the night, figuring it was probably someone playing a trick on us. Then the figure started walking toward us, and my walkie-talkie, which was on my hip, began broadcasting the Weather Channel. I jumped and fixed my walkie-talkie back to the right channel, and when I looked back, the person was gone. One of the kids asked where my coworker went, and I just said they must have gone to bed. I, to this day, have no idea who it was, if it was a person, or how they managed to get from right in front of me to behind me and down the path so fast. I asked everyone in the morning if they'd been out on the path, but no one owned up to it. It was crazy. Never had anything quite like that again. Shapeshifter in Washington Woods. I recently moved into a trailer on my sister's property, and one night I was lying in bed in a twilight state about to fall asleep until suddenly I heard footsteps in my trailer. I knew nothing was there because my German Shepherd/Wolf mixed dog, who was lying next to me, would have definitely alerted me. Then the November air grew hot and clammy, and I felt almost paralyzed. The next thing I hear is a knock at the door and my sister's voice telling me our mom was here and to come greet her. Mind you, my mom was in another state and had no plans to visit. I don't respond. I just lay there contemplating the situation. Then out of nowhere on the other side of the trailer where my bed is, I see out the window a tall, slender man thing walking past the window above my bed. My dog reared up and viciously barked at him. This is unusual because he likes the element of surprise so he can attack. The guy seemed alarmed and uttered the word "geez" and disappeared. I'm wondering if it was the same creature who knocked on my door or if it was something else coming to, I guess, protect me. I've had weird encounters in the past where someone or something magically appeared to scare off whatever was threatening me to begin with. Thoughts? It's been driving me crazy. Vanishing women near the cliff in the woods. I was thinking about an experience I had when I was younger, 8 to 10 years/0. I'm 22 now. I can't think of an explanation, and I felt like this would be a good place to share. When I was younger, I lived in a brick house that was built in the mid-70s, and it was at the end of a long driveway that had 5 houses along the road. We were at the very end. With this, we had a very large backyard that expanded out into a woods that went a half-mile or so directly behind the house until you reached another house. So one day I was exploring the woods, and I came across this 20-30 foot cliff. I was always in these woods, and I just had never come across this before, and it was just odd. I had this weird feeling, it just felt like the woods were so vast around me, so I left kind of quickly. The next day comes along, and my babysitter picks me up from school, and I'm telling her all about it. She was also my neighbor 2 doors down. She's surprised, she said she's never seen it before, and she would explore the woods as a kid too. So of course we had to go check it out right when we got back. We went up there, and I remember it being quiet. The wind was blowing on a nice fall day, and then it was almost like it spawned out of nowhere. This little baby deer with white spots all over it just kind of like came out of this small hole in the ground, and it was only a few feet away from us. It ran off to the right and made a sound that sounded like it said, "Mama." We watch it run off. Okay, right here is the unexplainable part. So as we watched this baby deer run off to the right, we were still on the edge of this cliff. It's almost kind of like a bowl, it drops down pretty steep, but it kind of wraps around like you can walk around it. You could throw a rock from one side over the gap to the other side where there's land again. So as both of us, my babysitter and I, were turning our heads back from the right, we were looking now back at the cliff. There is a woman with her back to us. She's standing maybe like 10 or 20 feet away from us. She has long, dark brown hair and a light and flowy white dress. We both just kind of freeze and stare at her for a good 5 seconds, and then I remember my babysitter, and we both look at each other, and she looks super pale and frightened. I imagine I probably had the same expression on my face. I can't explain this, but we turned back. This is like maybe a 3-second, 5-second exchange, and then poof, the women just vanished. My babysitter took me by the hand. I looked at her, she looked terrified. She looked like she was about to cry, and then we started sprinting back home. We get inside, turn all the lights on, and throw on Mario Kart on the Wii. She asks me not to tell my parents about what just happened because she doesn't want to get in trouble. I agree, and I just thought about it today, approximately 12 years later. I was camping with some friends. We were just sitting around the fire, having a few drinks and enjoying ourselves, when this random guy just walks out of the woods into the clearing we were in. Immediately we can tell he's on some kind of hard drugs. He comes up and asks for a cigarette, someone gives him one and lights it for him, and he just sits down at our fire. My brother chimes in that, while we were happy to give him a cig and a light, we would not like any additional company. The random guy starts complaining that he'd just like to hang out with us beautiful youngins and trying to laugh my brother off. He's making us all very uncomfortable and is obviously tweaking. My brother straight up tells him to leave. He becomes upset and starts rummaging through his pockets, while my brother firmly tells him that it's all of us against him and that he should leave while he still can. It was scary, but he staggered off back into the woods. We actually ended up having shifts to keep watch while we slept because we were afraid he might come back. He never did. I never want to go outside again. A few months ago, the summer after senior year, I and a few friends decided that we were going to go backpacking. We researched a little bit and found a good trail, 10 miles in and 10 miles out with hot springs by the end of the trail where we were going to sleep. The trail in question is in Big Sur, California. I think it was called the Pine Ridge Trail to Sykes Hot Springs. It's in the Ventana Wilderness Reserve. We prepared our belongings and set out for the trail, which included me, my best friend Aaron, a girl named Sarah whom Aaron is interested in, and Sarah's friend Sam. It is like a 4-hour drive to get out there. We started hiking at around 11 in the morning, and it felt a hell of a lot longer than 10 miles in. Practically no one else was hiking in either, everyone was hiking out. We arrived at the campsite, and by approximately 5:30 in the evening, we were the only ones present. The forecast was clear, so no one had brought tents. We are all fairly experienced backpackers, so we packed light. I set up my hammock, and everyone else was sharing a tarp on the ground. Around 8, we basically decided that we were exhausted and wanted to sleep, so we all prepared for bed when it started pouring rain. I take down my hammock and lie down under the tarp with everyone else. Of course I was last under the tarp, so I was right next to the ducking bag of trash. This is where shit got creepy. We all fall asleep. Around 1 a.m. Sam wakes up and is freaking the duck out. She says something was ducking playing with her hair. We all tell her to calm down, it's just a squirrel or some shit. We all fell asleep again. This time both Sam and I woke up to something sitting on top of us on the tarp, not something light either, easily like 150 plus pounds. We were both panicking quietly. Eventually whatever the duck was on top of us gets up and walks away. We woke up Aaron and Sarah, but they assumed we were just messing with them, as expected. By this point neither Sam nor I am going to fall asleep again, so we are just waiting for morning. Probably around 4 a.m., I hear a rustling next to me. Then a ducking hand reaches under the tarp and takes the bag of trash right next to my head. Sam and I wake everyone else up and start freaking out again. We just all stayed awake under the tarp until morning. It stopped raining at like 6:30, and we got out from under the tarp. We were still the only ones in the campsite. After we packed up, we searched for the bag of trash because we didn't want to leave it in the woods, as we love nature. We couldn't find it anywhere. Aaron found something else. He found ducking fresh handprints on the ground in the mud, leading to the tarp. The handprints couldn't have been more than 2 hours old because the rain would have washed them away. Aaron and Sarah now believed in Sam and me. We were either being hunted by a circus performer or experiencing some paranormal activity. We decided that we were done and left a day early. We hiked the 10 miles out in approximately 2.5 hours. We still don't really talk much about it. Aaron still backpacks, though, because he's ducking insane. I wasn't living in the wilderness, per se, but I was in a house in the woods in rural Pennsylvania. You get used to all kinds of noises and even moans and unsettling sounds. And you also get used to what is normal: bears, yes, they walk upright sometimes, deer, critters, etc., and what is not. One incident happened to me where I heard a low guttural growl outside my window. I had seen bears outside my window, so I wasn't alarmed, but this growl sounded distinctly different from any other growls I had previously heard. When I went to the window, I saw something in the distance with glowing red eyes. This is actually somewhat of a normal thing to see. Foxes and the like sometimes have glowing eyes at night. But what disturbed me was when the two glowing dots rose up and whatever was kneeling was now standing. It had to have been over 7 feet, 2.5 meters, tall. I couldn't shut my curtains because I was nervous about losing sight of whatever this was. I pulled out my phone to record it, and in that amount of time it had dashed, on 2 feet, across all of the length of woods I could see and disappeared. I sometimes saw strange tracks after that and still sometimes heard its guttural call. Not saying anything supernatural happened, but it was certainly inexplicable to me. I no longer reside there. Sierra whoops. I'm feeling a bit bored this evening, so I would like to share with you the story of the first time I went hunting and experienced a profound sense of unease, with my hair standing on end as I hurried back to the truck. This background information will aid in comprehending the situation. I live for the outdoors and hunting. I've been outside my entire life and explored on foot and with a dirt bike alone before I was even a teenager. Hunting is my life. I can't fully explain it, but even when the hunting is poor and the conditions are bad, I cannot convince myself to stay home. I'll be irritable and upset the entire time. If it's season and I have a tag, I have to be out there. Opening day of whitetail season in the south snuck up on me, and I had done zero scouting. I had found a place last year late in the season I really wanted to check out, though. My wife and I got out of the truck on this piece of public land, got our bows and our stands, and took off. I had a good idea where I wanted to go but had to try and find a place for her that I thought would work. I get her set up and head to where I want to be. Climbed the tree a bit, discouraged because I had seen zero sign along the way. The conditions were the worst. 90 degrees and still. I'm getting hammered by mosquitoes, as I had forgotten my thermocell. I was plumb miserable, sweating and flailing about trying not to get West Nile. I had been hearing something off and on in the distance, not paying any mind to it. Until I did. It was a long, drawn-out moaning. At first I thought it was dogs in the distance. Heard it again and definitely not dogs. I thought, oh yeah, you can hear cows a pretty good ways away from here. Maybe a big bull. It did it again, and nope. Not a cow. Then it sounded like it was actually two different locations it was coming from. I wasn't sure what the sound was, but I decided I definitely didn't want to be there after dark to find out. I got down, hastily packed my stand summit climber, and slung it over my back. The sun was just starting to set, so there was plenty of light and definitely plenty of shooting light. I normally don't get down until I can't see the ground anymore. Not this time. When I got to the trail, I set my stand down and slipped almost 200 yards away to where my wife was. No cell service in this area. I found her looking behind her in a tangle of a thicket. She had no idea I was there. I startled her when she realized I was there, and with a puzzled look, she asked, "The duck are you doing here?" I knew that I normally wouldn't be there to get her until after dark. I made up something about no sign, and the mosquitoes are miserable. Not untrue. See anything? I asked. No, but I kept hearing something in this thicket half circle around behind me, and then I got an awful smell of something. It's almost like dog crap and wet dogs. Ah man. It was probably a bear. Sucks you didn't get to see it, I said, so I get her packed out, stand on her back, and we set off for the truck. I picked up my stand along the way, and as you may recall, I packed it quickly without properly securing it, causing it to clank with each step. I didn't care. I was hot, fed up, frustrated, and somewhat unnerved. The light was getting dimmer, but there was still plenty of legal light available. About 150 yards from my truck, which was parked off the dirt road, I thought I heard a strange noise, but it was during a stand clank. I heard the noise again during another clank, but I froze, straining my ears and looking for the source of the sound. My wife asked what I was doing. I said I heard a weird noise. She said, "Oh, I heard that a few times. It's been doing that." But I have stood cranking 2 inches from my ear, making it hard to decipher. So after standing still for maybe a minute, I took off at my steady pace again. This time I heard it between clanks. And froze immediately. Heard it a few more times. It was a woo-oh sound. It was normally in pairs. The second is slightly different from the first in tone and duration. Okay, it was likely someone preparing to tune up their hunting dogs before the rifle season. I thought about trying to call their dogs. We walked as quietly as possible the rest of the way to the truck. I held my ground to keep from cranking. Got to the dirt road, and it was powder dry. No tracks over my tire tracks and no one on the road, like I thought there would be. All hair standing up. When we got home, I wouldn't let it go. I looked up every native owl and bird I could think of's vocals online, and nothing was close. I said, "Ha ha ha, let's watch this," and played some video along the lines of Sasquatch vocals. Nope. 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 Then the Sierra sounds. Identical whoops. My wife cried because it freaked her out to hear the same thing that we had only heard an hour ago. Never forget that. No idea what it was. I have. I'm not really sure what the duck it was. Was in Arkansas. My girlfriend and I at the time found a nature reserve online that allowed camping, so we went to check it out. The forest in the mountains is my type of place. On the way in we see some dude in Forest Service or whatever clothes. The sign indicates that this area is a site for studying bears, and although we are not expected to encounter any, we should still exercise caution. He was kinda weird. So we find our spot. It's a clearing. I start setting up the hammock and fire while she goes exploring with my dog. After a bit I start to worry and whistle for my dog. They show up soon. We eat dinner, drink some beer, and all three of us climb into the hammock. I'm having trouble sleeping, so I'm listening to the coyotes and scratching my pup. All of a sudden, everything is silent, and it gets cold. On the other side of the fire I see a dark figure. It's big, a lot taller than I am, and wide too. And it starts talking, I don't know what language, but it is guttural and raspy. I wake the GF up, car now, time to go. I make sure they are in, as I'm cutting the hammock free and hopping in the car. Zooming up the side of the mountain, and whatever it is chasing us. And it's fast. We manage to get the hell out of there and to the nearest town for a Walmart lot. As we leave the woods, she starts breaking out in hives everywhere, is hella itchy, and isn't feeling well at all. The sun comes up, and I go hustle up breakfast. Talking to some homebums, I mention this to them, they say the land was cursed or something. They have lived there their entire lives and don't know anyone that goes out there. No ducking clue what that was. I think about it often still. This was around 12 years or so ago. There are additional accounts from various locations, such as sightings of UFOs entering Mount Shasta and other unusual phenomena, but this experience was by far the most unsettling. Something weird happens in the woods every time I go hiking here. So, I am new to this. But here is my story, or rather a couple of stories. There is a hiking trail near me. This is not somewhere 200 miles from civilization. This is a spot that is decently popular and near a medium-sized city. For context, I typically encounter 2 to 3 individuals during my visits, which last a few hours. While the location is not excessively crowded, there is certainly a presence of other visitors. I had visited this place several times before the strange incident occurred, and there have been occasions when I went and nothing happened. Here is my collection of events that have happened at this spot, all in chronological order. 1. The first time something odd happened, I was with a friend of mine who is my roommate. It was in the winter time, the temperature was easily at or below freezing. My friend had just experienced a big breakup, so we wanted to get out of the place and do something. We decided to go on a hike at this particular location. We knew the trail would be empty in winter, so it was a good place to talk about life and distract him from the breakup. We saw one other car and a biker when we got there. We bundled up and hit the trail. It really wasn't bad being around freezing temps since the sun was up and we were moving. Anyways, we are hiking, and probably about a mile into the trail, we come across a field. For context, this field is on a hill, sort of, and the trail is at the bottom of the hill. There is a really old fence dividing the trail and the field. It looks like an old cow pasture fence. We get to a spot where you can kind of stop for a second and see the field and notice something odd. As soon as we stopped, we saw a man slowly sitting up from the grass, which was probably about 200 yards away in the field, and then he gradually stood up. He looks around, starts almost skipping around, but his movements look as if he were drunk. The time is like 11 a.m. He was just kind of stumbling around in a somewhat overly happy/creepy manner and stopped after doing this for a minute and lay back down. The weirder part is he was wearing shorts and short sleeves. No chance he saw us because of how the spot is tucked into the woods, but we got a weird feeling about it and left. The other car was gone when we got back to our car, so we are pretty sure it must have been that biker. We checked Google Earth and found that there are no houses, locations, or other parking lots within a couple of miles of that area, except for the one we used to arrive and depart. Where did this guy come from? What was he doing? I didn't think much of it. I went back a few times hiking there, and nothing happened, until the second part. The second time something happened was a few months later. This was around springtime, and this time I was alone. I had hiked the trail for about 2 hours and decided to turn around and head back home. This time, when I came across that spot that overlooks the field, I noticed a bunch of crows over toward the field. I swear, guys, I then heard what sounded like clicking noises coming from the woods on the opposite side of the trail from the field. So crows were on one side of me in the field and clicking on the other. It didn't sound like anything I had ever heard before in the woods from an animal. Instead, it resembled a person clicking their mouth. I felt increasingly uneasy, and as soon as I did, the crows began to act wildly. This creeped me the hell out more, and I hit the classic run as fast as you can and don't stop. And then the weirdest thing happened. When I got to the entrance of the trail, I saw 2 red-eyed white rabbits, just chilling. No cars were parked, I was the only car there. Not only did I see these rabbits, but they let me walk up and ducking touch them. Never have I seen wild white rabbits where I live, and they let me walk up and touch them. Like, WTF is that? It felt like a dream. Weird stuff, very weird stuff. 3. Today is the 3rd time something has happened at the same spot. Once again, I have visited the location a few times since the second event, and nothing unusual has occurred. I don't feel like I should fear for my safety, it's just creepy, that's all. On a summer day, I know that other people are nearby, so I'm not isolated miles away from anyone. This time I was walking with my dog. Once again, I walked about an hour or so one way. Everything was good, so I turned around and headed back. When we were approaching this notorious creepy spot, my dog started acting like he saw something in the woods and kept perking his ears and head up. These are ordinary woods. This isn't a movie set in unrealistic forests where visibility is limited to just 5 feet. Instead, these are regular woods with minimal underbrush, and I would clearly be able to see if a squirrel or rabbit was drawing my dog's attention, but I saw nothing. There was no movement or any signs of wildlife, yet my dog kept his ears perked and even barked a few times, which is unusual for him unless he is certain he sees something. And then, right when we arrived at the location where both instances 1 and 2 occurred, I suddenly smelled a strong scent of copper. It lasted probably 2 seconds and went away. I got back to the car, and nothing else happened. Just a very odd collection of events at this one spot on the trail plus the white rabbits. I don't know what to make of it. This particular spot is ruining one of my favorite hiking trails. But it's just a collection of very odd events. The second event is by far the oddest, and it was the only time I really felt like something was going on. My friend suggested it sounds skinwalker-ish, but that seems a little far-fetched. This is in North Carolina, by the way. White eyes in the forest. So this is my first time seeing something like this. It was roughly about a week ago. The sun had just set, and I just got out of the deer stand. I had my headlamp on, scanning the forest as I walked back to my house, and I saw 2 whitish glowing eyes about 8 feet tall looking at me as I walked out of the forest. There was a sense of slight spookiness and being startled that came over me because I wasn't expecting it, but I said some things and walked out of the forest. A couple of nights ago it was around the same time, and I didn't see anything like it again. Has anybody seen something like this before, or if so, do you know what it is? Maybe some information about these. Watching eyes, thanks. Thing in the woods. I'm not sure where to start. It all started when I was barely ducking 6. Now of course kids see things that grown-ups can't see, but sometimes I still do. When I was 5, my parents had split up. Mostly I stayed with my father because my mom had to travel 4 hours back and forth to get me, so every 2 weeks I stayed with her on the weekends. My grandma's health was declining fast, so we knew she didn't have much time left. I was very close to her, although at the age of 5, I did not fully comprehend the situation. My dad and I never had a good bond, so I got given a phone because he didn't bother doing a lot with me. You know, just those small Android phones. So I was on there a lot. One evening I was crying and screaming to go to my mom. Once my dad had enough, he packed my bags and got in the car with me, bringing me to my mom. This is something he did not disclose to me. That was the night my grandma died as well. My mom begged him to tell me, but he didn't. He was calling my mom, both screaming, while we were driving down the highway. Eventually my dad pulled over on the side of the highway because it was getting more intense and he didn't want to get in an accident. He told me to stay put and he'd be back in a few minutes, so I did while he got out and walked away. Minutes passed by, it was midnight, so I could barely see anything except the lights across the highway. On the other side of the car were woods. I was crying because, of course, what 5-year-old wouldn't when they were alone in the dark? I was pulling the door handle until I heard hushed voices. I slowly looked up confused. It was hard to see, but between the trees at the edge there was a tall, mannish thing. I'm not talking 6 feet, I'm talking at least 7 feet or taller. I didn't feel scared or peaceful, but I just stared at the entity, not daring to look away. I heard the car door open as I looked in front of me and saw my dad get in. When I looked back, the thing vanished. Rewind a few more years later, I really started getting into creepy and horror. The advantage of having a phone at a young age was that you could easily find anything you wanted if you knew where to look. I always felt a strong connection to the woods, as if I were never alone. I'd go there at least 4 times a day and stay until the late hours between 1 and 3 a.m. I swear, sometimes I witnessed that thing right before my eyes. I attempted to share my experiences with my friends, however, given the depth of the horror I was experiencing, they often dismissed my accounts as mere imagination. I spent most of my life in houses where people died or took their own lives, so I wasn't surprised if they were haunted. However, I always found myself returning to that one specific thing. It's hard to explain how it looks. Its legs were so tall I'd have to look up all the way to the sky to even try to see its face, though. I never did. It was always just a void of black. No matter what angle, it was just black. Now, most might say I'm making myself paranoid or hallucinating. However, I have experienced a great deal in my life, and the only diagnosis I have ever received is depression. I gave up trying to tell people. It didn't hurt me, it just sat there, and the older I get, the more I see it. The closer it gets. I'm almost 19 now, and I don't know what to think of it. I'm not scared, but at the same time, I feel indifferent about it. I don't know how to explain it. But please, for anyone out there, I need to know what this thing is. Has anyone else seen it? Has anyone else got through the same issue? I don't know anymore. It started the day my grandma died. That thing can't be her. Right? I drew it before, the first time I saw it. But people would just laugh at me. I'm hoping to share this so that people understand and don't call me paranoid or crazy. I've never been a big believer in the paranormal, though I do love it. But right now, I don't know if I can even call it that. This is something I'm not joking about. This is my story, and I hope to share it with others. Please be respectful too. I never really told anyone about this. It's just too much in my mind, and I need to get it out somewhere. Thank you. Strange experiences my family and I have had on our property in Kisatchie National Forest, central Louisiana. Has anyone had a similar experience? And do you guys think strange encounters are tied to the missing 411 phenomenon? So, I want to start by giving a little background info about my family members and then my wife and me. My family members are all either in the medical field or in the IT field, my grandparents included. They are credible people, and they are usually pretty skeptical to a certain point. My wife is working on her bachelor's degree in radiology, X-ray, and I am working on my master's degree in data analytics. My wife and I both attend online programs for school due to COVID and the fact that we have a 1.5-year-old. So, our property consists of 55 acres of dense forest and a small house. My family has owned the property for a little under a decade, and no one lives out there. My family bought it for an occasional getaway and for emergencies. My grandparents and both my uncles would always tell us stories of hearing strange sounds at night, something beating on tree trunks with sticks, and they would apparently hear something knock up against the house from time to time. They would also hear whistles at night, and they would find broken tree limbs set up in weird ways, almost like some kind of fence or barricade towards the back of our property. My grandpa, trying not to sound crazy, said he thought it was essentially a North American primate that hadn't been officially acknowledged by the scientific community. Bigfoot lol. And my wife and I had never been believers in Bigfoot, ever. I'm a believer in ETs, I guess, because the universe is so big, but I would have never considered Bigfoot's existence a possibility. Or any other large undiscovered mammal in North America for that matter. In April, my wife and I decided to stay out there for a few months to escape the distractions of being in our early 20s and living in the city. On our very first night there, after moving all of our belongings into the house, we began to experience the same phenomena that my family had described. We heard strange noises, knocks, and whistles, and it always felt like someone was watching us. We would have fires right by the tree line at night while enjoying a few drinks, and we often heard something that sounded like a large creature with 2 legs just inside the tree line, where we couldn't see it. This creature would sit there without moving away, but it would walk back and forth inside the tree line, observing us. Whatever it was probably curious because there hadn't been any human activity whatsoever on our property in over a year until my wife and I came along. For about a month and a half, the same occurrences happened repeatedly, primarily involving strange noises that started as soon as the sun set and continued until it rose again every night. Then, my wife and I actually saw something one night, so it was like 10 p.m., and we were outside in front of the house, and behind the house is where the forest is. I'm on the phone with the internet people because our internet was down, and my wife and I heard something that sounded like a coyote howl coming from the small field that separates our house and the forest. It was less than 100 yards away, but my house lights don't reach that far, therefore, we couldn't see what it was. Almost simultaneously, we heard a second sound that was a high-pitched chuckle coming from the same direction, leading us to believe that there was more than one of whatever it was. 30 to 40 yards away is my neighbor's stable. Anyways, about 5 minutes pass, and we don't think anything of it. I thought it was just coyotes. Well, to the left of my house, about 30 to 40 yards away, is my neighbor's stable, where all of their livestock hang out. 2 or 3 horses, goats, cows, some chickens, and 2 guard dogs. My neighbors bought all those animals, except the dogs and horses, 2 weeks before this event. So the livestock was a new addition to my neighbor's property. So anyways, I noticed that the mama cow was getting pissed about something. And she was looking at something in the dark that my wife and I couldn't see. The mama cow actually stepped on one of her calves by accident, trying to get in between them and whatever it was that was spooking her. A few seconds later she charged at whatever it was, and then my wife and I were finally able to make out the animal in the darkness. Initially, the creature was on all fours, or somewhat squatting down, but when the cow charged at it, it stood up on 2 legs and ran away. It was black or dark brown, and it was around 7 feet tall. One weird thing is when it ran away, it made no sound whatsoever, and this all happened 30 to 40 yards away from where my wife and I were standing. Another weird thing is that my neighbor's dogs roamed freely at all times, and they would bark at everything. But for some reason when this happened, those dogs were nowhere to be found. It was almost as if the dogs wanted to avoid whatever it was that we saw. So what I heard sounded like coyotes, but what I saw looked like a bear, I guess you could say. The only thing is that bears don't make those kinds of sounds, and they also don't run from a threat on their hind legs, so I don't know for sure what it was. I always thought it was pretty unlikely that Bigfoot exists, but there is something out there. All I know is that there weren't any animals known for living in Kisatchie National Forest. I was born and raised in Houston, but I have spent a lot of time hunting, and I lived in Colorado for a year and hiked the mountains almost every weekend. Therefore, I would consider myself quite knowledgeable about outdoor activities and proficient in identifying common animals by sound and sight. After my wife and I finally discovered the source of the strange noises that had been disturbing us each night, she was so unsettled that we packed our belongings and returned to Houston a few days later. Literally lol. I attempted to persuade her to stay, as I appreciated our time there despite the unusual occurrences. But she couldn't handle being out there any longer, and when nighttime came around, she would always be super anxious. I actually didn't have any idea about the whole missing 411 subject until that experience led me to do some research, so this is all relatively new to me. The whole experience definitely opened up my mind a little bit. So that's my story. This may seem a little off topic, but it's a reminder that there are things in our parks and national forests that are unexplained, and there are things we have yet to discover. It makes me wonder if these unexplained phenomena have ever harmed a hiker or taken a small child. Always be prepared, regardless of the situation or who you're with, when venturing into the wilderness. I had an experience while hiking at Cat and Thomas Mountains in Bolton Landing, New York. As my friends and I were finishing our hike, a white male and Asian female were about a mile in, on their way presumably to one or both summits. They definitely were not dressed for the hike in the elements, designer clothing. She was wearing all white, including very basic but I'm sure very expensive footwear. He was dressed in just drab colors but definitely high-end clothing. Two outfits that definitely wouldn't hold up well given the muddy conditions and visible water over parts of the trail. Anyway, they approached me and my friends, and the guy was asking what to expect as they progressed. It was not an odd question, and I tried to politely suggest that they would likely ruin their clothes. Keep in mind that once the couple was standing in front of us, the woman kept her back to me as I spoke. At one point, however, she did in fact turn around. And I almost jumped back. She had wide-framed but thin glasses on, making her eyes and cheeks look rather artificial. She never said a word. Her movements prior to getting to us seemed off, not natural, and very rigid, but I attributed that to her footwear on rocky terrain, which could have truly been the case. At one point, the guy noticed that one of my lady friends and I were staring at this woman. I was mid-answer to the guy, and he abruptly but politely cut me off and said that they had no time to talk and had to continue. So, we parted ways. But I just couldn't get over how this woman looked. Her eyes were truly black, pupil, iris, and sclera. I was questioning everything with the two women I was with, and one of them suggested that I return to that couple, tactfully try to be friendly, and ask for a selfie under the pretense of vlogging about making new friends on the trail. So I turned to ascend the trail, but that couple had already disappeared. They didn't have time to get too far away, and I'm a pretty quick and experienced hiker and runner. But they were gone. I stood in silence, thinking that maybe this couple went off trail. I could see much in the woods, but it was just gone. Had they gone off trail, they would have been heard. This was probably around 2021. And it's bothered me ever since. I even went to websites from Asian countries trying to find any eyeglass technology that could literally transform like this woman's, but I found nothing. We went camping for extended periods of time, a month or more at a time. We camped in areas where the largest wildlife were usually condors passing over or the occasional lost or feral dog. One year my family and I all encountered some strange stuff happening at our campsite. Our food storages were broken into, and items would randomly disappear and then reappear somewhere further away that none of us would have put them. Like a cup would somehow disappear from the table and be found standing upright on the edge of the campground, or a shoe would disappear from right outside the tent and be found on top of a bush near the communal bathroom. We would hear the sound of something large moving around our campsite at night, scraping against the top of the tent. We'd find weird tracks in the area that looked like small cow prints and some that looked like misshapen bear prints. At night the woods would be unusually quiet. We'd hear what sounded like whispering at odd hours of the night, etc. One day all of us older kids were given machetes, and the younger kids were given our old survival knives. We were instructed to play in the lake while keeping an eye on our belongings, as some of the adults were heading into town. While we played in the lake, we discussed the strange occurrences and debated what could be causing them. Bears? Serial killer? Fawns? Hobos? Bigfoot? Werewolves? We looked towards the shore and saw something large near our belongings. I wear glasses and can't see for shit without them, so all I saw was a big black blob, and I kept asking everyone, what was that? But they wouldn't give me an actual description, they just kept saying, I don't know, it's a big thing? So we started making a bunch of noise and swimming towards the shore. Then my cousin stopped us because he said he saw it pick up one of our machetes, and it just continued standing there. We ended up swimming to the other side of the lake and hiking back to retrieve our stuff. The entire time we kept trying not to talk about the likelihood of us coming back to a crime scene or getting ended in the woods. Whenever I asked for more descriptions of what it was, I couldn't get an actual response. It was a person, but it was far too big to be a person. No, it was person-sized, but it was just really hairy. No, it wasn't super hairy, it just had pitch black skin. No, it was too tall to be a person, and its limbs weren't right. A few hours later we retrieved our stuff that was now thrown around the area we had left it. My cousins and my shorts were missing, a different cousin's shirt was missing, and we only found 3 of the 10 socks that were supposed to be there, but, thankfully, all the machetes and knives were accounted for. We snuck up to the campsite and found everything trashed, and the 2 adults who had been left at the site came over in a hurry with one of the camp rangers. They explained that something had been circling the area, so they went to find us but couldn't find us at the lake, so they went to get a ranger, and thankfully they found us before the search had actually started. We explained that we had seen something by the lake edge and that we had to hike back from the other side. The ranger took all of our statements and kind of shrugged, saying maybe it was a bear just passing through the area for the first time in over 50 years, and then he left and told us to stay safe. We cleaned up the campsite and found 2 of our tents absolutely shredded, and a small propane tank was in the extinguished fire pit. When the other adults got back from town, all of us kids were put into one tent while the adults chatted quietly. We saw that one of our uncles had had a friend bring some of his guns from home. My uncle is a bit of a hunting nut/gun enthusiast, and from what we could hear, none of the people in town knew of any bears or new wildlife in the area, but there had been a lot of campers leaving early that year. We were all put to bed early in one tent and told to keep our weapons near us, lanterns off, and to not leave for anything but to be careful. We all ended up sleeping in shifts, and thanks to that, we found out that the adults were doing the same thing. We packed everything up the next morning and ended the camping trip about 3 weeks early. About 2 years later we started camping again, but it was in a more touristy camping park near the lake. I found phantom deer prints in the snow. By early 2018, my family had bought a cottage in the rural Irish Midlands. A few weeks after moving, the country was suddenly hit by a very heavy snowstorm, which had closed off all the country roads leading in and out of the village. The village we lived in just happened to be directly next to the Bog of Allen, the largest area of raised bogland in the country. With no school for a couple of weeks, due to the snowstorm, and still being new to the area, I took the chance to go exploring this bogland with my dog. After reaching the bog through the heavy snow, my dog and I followed along a trail path, which led us to an artificial forest. Continuing along this trail through the forest, I then came upon a line of hoof prints in the snow. The prints clearly belonged to a deer and, judging by the size, were most likely a yearling. But what was strange about the hoof prints was that they seemed to start directly in the middle of the trail, where further along it, they then stopped. The hoof prints didn't start from within the forest, come onto the trail, and then go back into the trees. It was as though the deer that made them appeared on the trail out of thin air and then just vanished. Following these hoof prints to where they ended on the trail, there was no indication in the snow of the deer leaping into the trees, which could have explained why the prints ended so abruptly. Every print in the snow was more or less identical to the others. There were no lines, marks, or anything to imply the deer leapt. I even went into the trees to see if I could find more deer prints to rationalize this leap theory, but by my best efforts, I couldn't. I can also rule out the theory of snow drifts partially covering up the prints, as I don't remember seeing any while on the trail. One theory I did have at the time, however, was that the continual snowfall had covered up parts of the deer prints, but there was no indication of that either. The prints clearly started and ended on the trail. 8 years later and I still don't know what to make of these deer prints. Although I do believe certain things relating to the paranormal, I do think there is still a rational explanation behind what I've come to call the phantom deer prints. I've heard of not a deer stories before and even deer stories relating to skinwalkers. But is there such a thing as phantom deer prints? I have no idea. I'm not trying to convince anyone that I really saw phantom deer prints in the snow, because I already know I saw them. But if anyone has any rational explanations that I may have missed, or even if you want to suggest a paranormal one, I'd really like to hear them. I used to live near a bunch of woods and would explore with my friends all the time. Some weird stuff happened there, though. One time we were walking and found a slide in the middle of the woods with torn up stuffed animals all around it. It looked like blood streaked down it, so we ran, thinking maybe an animal or some killer or something was responsible. I got curious and came back the next day. The blood was just still water and rust, that had turned ducking red. Still, I have no clue how it got back there, or the stuffed animals, and why it was standing perfectly, not like it was dumped back there. We also found a big boat back there, weathered by the elements and animals, also filled with that red, still water that looks like blood. We also found a boating license under it that was dated 1983. There was this big cabin deep in the woods that was so hard to find, but it was fully abandoned. It looked as if it had been since the 20s. Still, there was old food in jars, antique chairs, and random toys everywhere. It looked like everything was left the same for years, but the entire floor was covered in dust and leaves. The kicker is that there is a cow near the cabin. By himself at this abandoned cabin in the woods. He was fully black, and his face was white, so we called him Scully because he would watch us from the woods when we got close to the cabin, and he looked like a floating skull. The whole thing was so confusing. Everything was miles apart. It's not like it could be someone's abandoned property in the woods. Plus everything was aged so differently, the cabin from the 20s, the boat from the 80s, and the slide and toys from the early 2000s. So bizarre. Only a few of my friends would go there with me, the rest were too sketched out. I would love clarification about the encounter we had in the woods. About 2 months ago, my friend and I decided to go on a hike at 10 p.m., so we went off into the foothills of the Rockies and were hiking in a fairly well-maintained and trafficked area. But due to the time, no one else was there. But I had seen movement out of the corner of my eyes a couple times, nothing I could pin down since, by the time I would turn my head to look, not even a leaf would be moving. I started to get more and more uncomfortable and filled with dread as we kept going and screwing around at various points. So at around 12 we start heading back to the trailhead. And on our way back, the small sightings of movement pick up. And that's when I realized why I was feeling so uneasy. There was absolutely no sound from the trees around us, not the rustling of small animals or sounds of any nocturnal creatures. That realization made me even more uncomfortable, plus the fact that my friend who does this stuff more regularly than me and believes in the paranormal was looking a bit rigid and stressed. When we were about 30 minutes from the trailhead, we heard something off to our right in the woods, not a rustle, chirp, growl, or any natural noise but the chime of what sounded like a small bell. We both stopped dead, looked in that direction for a second, and kept walking. As we walked, every couple steps, we would hear the same chime. When we stopped, it would stop. It was keeping a perfect pace with us. I could tell by looking at my friend that we just needed to get back to the car. I'm not necessarily a huge believer in the paranormal, but I don't like to tempt fate, so we both stayed silent and didn't mention the sounds or anything until we started getting closer to the car, and he decided to start a lighthearted conversation about celebrity crushes. He later told me that he was trying to put out a positive energy to dispel whatever was there. We eventually got back to the car and drove back to campus. But we didn't discuss anything until we were safely back in the dorm building, and apparently we had both experienced the exact same thing, as in the small movements in our peripherals and the bell chiming. He also claimed he heard breathing, which was weird considering I didn't, but his hearing may be better than mine. If anyone had any clue what we encountered, I would love to know. I would also be curious how much actual danger we were in. Voice coming from the woods. So a few days ago my boyfriend and I arrived at home late at night around 1 a.m. For context, we live with my sister and her fiancé. We pull into the driveway, my boyfriend is in the passenger seat, which is closer to the woods on the right, and I am in the driver's seat closer to the house. Our car was next to the trail leading into the woods. As soon as he had opened the car door, we heard, hello? It sounded like it was at the beginning of the trail, around 5 feet away. And the voice sounded exactly like my sister in a sassy tone rather than a helpful tone. He kept looking and saw nothing. I told him to close the door, and we drove away. We called my sister and asked if that was her, and she said she has no idea what we're even talking about and was half asleep. We went back, and my sister waited by the door for us. We went inside, and nothing happened. It's been keeping me up at night. I've had weird encounters like this before with this house. This last part is irrelevant, but it explains what other encounter I've had. Approximately a year ago, during a period when I was more actively engaged with Christianity, I became quite curious about the concept of selling one's soul. I'm not planning on it, I was just curious. While watching a video about a man selling his soul, I noticed things falling off my dresser, heard scratching from underneath my bed, and then heard a woman screaming right outside my window. Naturally, I began reading the Bible, and as soon as I started praying, everything stopped immediately. So I don't know, but it's been keeping me up, and I need advice. My grandfather had one rule growing up in Puerto Rico: never go into the woods after sundown. My grandfather only had one rule when I was growing up in Puerto Rico: never go into the woods after sundown. He said it all the time, but he never explained why. At the time I assumed it was just one of those old rural superstitions. I didn't realize until I was 14 that he meant it very seriously. I grew up in Fajardo, a beach town on the eastern side of Puerto Rico. Most people think about the ocean when they hear that name. Boats, fishing docks, and ferries heading to the smaller islands. But if you actually grow up there, you learn pretty quickly that the ocean isn't the only thing surrounding the town. Behind the neighborhoods and houses, the land turns into thick forest and hills. The woods start just past the last row of houses. Once you get into them, the trees grow close together, the ground becomes uneven, and once the sun goes down, it gets dark in a way that's hard to describe unless you've experienced it. I lived with my dad growing up, but my grandparents were our next door neighbors, so I spent a lot of time at their house whenever my dad was working. That meant my grandfather was around almost every day of my life. He wasn't the kind of man you'd expect to believe in anything supernatural. When he was younger he had been around 6 feet 3 inches, though by the time I knew him, old age had brought him closer to 6 feet. He was still broad-shouldered and imposing, the kind of man who looked like he had spent his entire life doing hard work. He served in the U.S. Army for about a decade starting in the late 1940s, and after leaving the service, he worked a number of jobs before eventually opening a small bodega in New York during the 1970s. Later he moved back to Puerto Rico. He wasn't superstitious. Which is why the rule always felt strange. Every evening he would sit on the balcony in a long blue and white hospital chair he had because of circulation problems in his legs. From there he could see the street and the houses across from us. The woods were behind the houses, out of view. Still, almost every day at some point he would repeat the same warning: never go into the woods after sundown. He never explained why. One evening when I was about 14, one of my best friends came over. The sun was already starting to dip behind the hills. The sky had that deep orange color that tells you night is coming soon. He asked if we could go explore. And he meant the woods. Normally I would have asked my grandfather if it was okay. But that time I didn't. I knew what he would say. So instead I just told him we were going out for a walk. As we were leaving through the gate, he called out to me from the balcony: "Don't go into the woods after sundown." The words caught me off guard. I hadn't said anything about the woods. For a moment I wondered if he somehow knew. I laughed it off and said we wouldn't. But the warning stayed in the back of my mind. We went into the woods anyway. At first everything felt normal. We followed one of the trails we had walked plenty of times before. The coqui frogs were chirping, and the trees moved gently with the evening breeze. Eventually the light faded until moonlight was the only thing lighting the path. After a while my friend said he needed to take a leak, so he stepped off the trail and walked a little deeper between the trees. I waited. 1 minute passed. Then another. Then a few more. Something about the woods suddenly felt different. Quieter. Too quiet. So I stepped off the trail and went looking for him. Instead of finding him, I walked straight into a clearing. At first I thought I recognized it. There was a small open spot in the woods where one of the neighbors had thrown a party once when I was younger. I remembered music, people drinking, and a fire pit in the middle. But something about this clearing didn't feel right. The one I remembered was small. Maybe 20 feet across at most. This one was much bigger. The tree line stretched farther out than I remembered, forming a wide circle around me. For a moment I wondered if I had somehow walked to a completely different place. But I didn't remember there being any other clearings nearby. And standing in the middle of it was a figure. At first I thought it was my friend. So I called his name. No response. I walked farther out of the trees, thinking maybe he just couldn't hear me. By the time I realized something was wrong, I was already deep in the clearing. The figure slowly turned around. And suddenly I realized I was less than 10 feet away. It wasn't my friend. It was an old woman. From the edge of the clearing, she had looked tall. But up close she looked small and frail. Her skin was pale, and her hair was white as snow, hanging loosely around her shoulders. Her expression is something I still struggle to describe. The best way I can explain it is this: she looked angry. Not normal anger. Something deeper. Something that made her face look almost possessed. For a second we just stared at each other. Then she lifted her hands. The way she moved them didn't look normal. They moved too fast, too sharply for someone who looked that old. Almost like her body didn't match the way she was moving. She started murmuring something under her breath. I couldn't understand the words. At the same time, the wind suddenly picked up around the clearing. Not a breeze. A sudden rush of air that pushed through the trees and made the branches bend. Then the temperature dropped. Anyone who has been to Puerto Rico knows how strange that is. Even at night the air is warm. But suddenly the cold hit my chest when I breathed. The wind got stronger. The trees around the clearing started swaying. And the entire time she kept moving her hands in the air, murmuring something I couldn't understand. Fear completely took over. I shut my eyes and braced myself for something to happen. But after a few seconds, everything stopped. The wind died instantly. The cold disappeared. The sounds of the forest slowly returned. When I opened my eyes, the clearing was empty. She was gone. It took almost an hour before my friend and I finally found each other again. According to him, he had never moved from the spot where he stepped off the trail. He said 1 minute I was standing there. And the next minute I was gone. We walked out of the woods quickly. The entire time it felt as if something was watching us from between the trees. But the moment we stepped out under the streetlights, that feeling disappeared. When I got home, my grandfather was still on the balcony. At first he looked angry that I had stayed out so late. But the moment he saw my face, his expression changed. "You're pale, what happened?" he asked. I told him everything. When I finished, he slowly turned and looked toward the dark line of houses that stood between us and the woods. For the first time in my life, that big, tough man looked pale. Finally, he spoke. "Brujas witches." He immediately went inside and started closing the windows. Every single one. Then he locked the doors. That wasn't something he normally did. Not like that. Before I left for my house next door, I looked back through the doorway. My grandfather was sitting alone in the living room. And for the first time in a long time, I saw him praying the rosary. After that night, we never talked about what happened in the woods again. And he never repeated the rule. He didn't have to. Because from that night on, I understood exactly why he said it. Some places change after the sun goes down. And whatever I saw that night is the reason I will never go into the woods after sundown again. Of course it was a camping trip. Okay, so I was about 6 to 7 when this happened, and I was absolutely terrified of the woods at night. I was more nervous about skinwalkers than bears or wolves. One night after we told scary stories, we went to lie down in the tent. It was me, my mom, and my dad. I was in the middle, right in front of this big window that looked out into the trees. I never go to bed fast when I'm camping, so my parents were asleep and I was just listening to the sounds of the woods, and then it went dead silent. The only thing I could hear was the water. I knew that meant something big was out in the woods around me, but I was not as scared as I should have been. Anyways, it was silent for about 20 to 30 seconds until I heard a little chuckle, a very real, very human chuckle come from one of the trees a bit far off. I almost passed out, I was so scared. A few minutes later, the forest sounds come back, and I eventually fall asleep. Nothing else happened, at least while I was awake. A night on a private land hunt in Texas. So back in 2013 to 2014, one of my buddies had invited me to their privately owned hunting land so I could go spend time with him and his family hunting and camping. I was around 12 or 13 at this time. This was in the southeast Texas area. This privately owned land belonged to his family, who had all contributed to its purchase, and they used it for hunting or shooting whenever they wanted, as some family members lived in small towns. I would estimate that the property covers about 500 acres, which is a fairly substantial size, providing ample space for various activities. However, the entire area is surrounded by a high fence, and there is only one entrance for access. The camp is located about 1 mile from the main entrance road and is always gated and locked, ensuring that no one can enter without a key. Each family has one key, and no one else has access since it is their land. We stayed there for the weekend, from Friday to Sunday afternoon, because school was still in session. On the first day of our arrival, we focused on setting up the camp, which involved arranging chairs and tables, as well as ensuring that the campers were properly settled. The day was relatively relaxed, with the exception of my friend, his uncle, and his father expressing a desire to go coyote hunting. I joined them, and it was one of the scariest times of my life because the coyotes were barking so close that it sounded like they would eat us. The next day, after completing all the preparations, the actual hunt began. So, early in the morning, my friend and I went to the hunting blind and just sat there for about an hour before the sun started coming out, And after a few more hours of hunting and nothing, we got out of the blind and just started walking towards the open area where the blind was pointing to and just were looking for any tracks from deer or anything, but there were none. So we had to head back to camp on the four-wheeler until my friend's dad had gotten a radio call saying one of the uncle's wives had gotten a deer, so we went over to their blind and helped them with it, and after a while it became dark, so we headed back to camp. We were outside around the campfire, and how the camp was set up, we were on a hill where we could see almost all of the land in front of us, so it was nice seeing everything. But my friend's uncle had noticed lights flashing out in the distance on the land, and everyone was in camp, so it was not them. And when he saw those lights, he had thought someone had snuck in on the land because there are trail cameras on the entrance and at all of the hunting blinds just so when they aren't there, he can see if anything is going on, but he has seen some of the deer feeds knocked over, so he believes someone sneaks in and tears up stuff. So he and my friend's dad go off on one of the off-road buggies and leave a walkie-talkie with us, and we can clearly see lights still flashing out in the woods as if someone were walking with flashlights in the thick trees and bushes, but when they got to where they had thought they had seen the lights, they couldn't see anything, and we were still seeing those flickering lights, so we tell them where we see them, and they still don't see anything. So at this point they have been searching and trying to find where those lights are coming from for about 20 to 30 minutes already, and all of a sudden we get basically blinded by a bright light beam as if they had shined a high-powered beam of light towards our direction, and so we called them and asked if they did that, and they asked what they did, so we told them, and they said they don't have their flashlights on or even headlights on. They had been sitting there, trying to listen for any sounds. So we are starting to wonder what this can be since they don't see any type of light over there, but we could. So they finally came in, and at that point the lights had disappeared. To this day, I still wonder what those lights could have been. Possible skinwalker story, Appalachia, thoughts? I work in the woods a lot, often in teams covering hundreds of acres throughout the southeast. I was working on site as a field lead, 2 teams of 2, in the mountains outside of Chattanooga. This particular property has been heavily mined and heavily polluted. We would find dead animals, turtles, beavers, etc. because of remnants of the coal mines and acid wash drainage. I think the pH of the water was below 2. Towards dusk I got a message from the other team that they saw me on another ridge and I should wait for them. They would join up and walk back to the car. The issue is that I was a mile away, nowhere close to them. When I got reception enough to call them, they swore that it was me that they called too, at which point I looked back at them and kept moving. They said they had a good look at the face and that it was near impossible it wasn't me. When I heard that, the hair stood on the back of my neck, and we stopped work immediately and went back to the cars. None of the others grew up in the Appalachian regions or knew the lore. They thought I was just playing a joke on them or trying to scare them, but it wasn't me. There shouldn't have been anyone else on the site, much less dressed like me. I always thought skinwalkers were further north or out west, not in TN. Is there another phenomenon or explanation? Could the dead animals and pollutants trigger something? Would love everyone's thoughts. I think something followed me home. I've been somewhere I shouldn't have, again. I think something followed me home. I want to know what I'm dealing with here. This is going to be a long story, but a lot of strange shit has been happening. It all started after I went on a solo camping trip to the east coast of the UK. My plan was to camp out up and down the Cleveland Way and into the moors, with the first night being at Whitby Abbey. On the first night I slept near the Abbey, and the nightmares that I had were unhinged. They involved slow and painful torture that I couldn't wake from. It was so vivid, and I felt everything. I woke up at 5 a.m., all my muscles felt like they had been ripped, and I was soaking in sweat despite it being 2 degrees. Bad start. I tried to forget about it and just blamed it on the cold, had breakfast, and then packed up my shit and started the day's trek. That day weird shit just kept happening, things I can't explain, and it's driving me insane. I was about 2 hours down the trail, the sun was out, and I was having a gay old time listening to some bass lines and keeping pace. I had to descend 60 feet, and my shoes were damp, so I was focused on my footing. I noticed I had 2 shadows and then suddenly one. The sun wasn't in the right position. I kept trying to recreate the double shadow to take a photo, but I couldn't. Just a trick of the light, and I'm tired, right? A few hours later I stopped for lunch on the cliff edge. I can see all around me. It would take someone 15 minutes from me spotting them to them getting to me, so why am I hearing pacing? It gets quieter and then disappears after a while. I assume it was my blood sugar. I kept hearing this every time I stopped. A few hours later, I arrived at my camping destination, feeling unwell and exhausted. All I wanted was to set up my tent and sleep before the storm hit that evening. I started setting up my tent only to notice a slash in the bottom. What the actual duck? I definitely would have noticed that slash when I packed the tent that morning. Nothing in my backpack could have caused a slash like that. Duck's sake, I'm too exhausted to deal with this. I was able to find a local farm that had a hut I could stay in. I packed up my shit and made the extra trek. By this point I was physically dead, I really pushed myself, and I was at my limit of exhaustion. I went inside, turned the heater on, locked the door, and fell asleep fully clothed and sat up. I had another night of nightmares. I had my eyes removed this time. I woke up at 7, confused about why I was inside a warm box and not a freezing tent. Well then, I don't have a tent now, I better go home. I didn't unpack my bag the previous evening, I just needed to get a change of clothes out, and then I could make my return. Everything in my bag is packed just as I packed it. I went to retrieve my comfort outfit, my favorite comfy clothes that I've had for a decade, and they aren't in my bag. A load of stuff is missing from my bag. A whole outfit, to be exact. A jumper, a long sleeve thermal leggings, my favorite socks, a sports bra, and some underwear. Okay then. Maybe I left them at home? But that doesn't make sense. I pack with precision, I need to. I keep a list of everything I brought with me and check it off at camp stops. Where the duck? This bag hasn't been out of my sight. This isn't possible. I want to go home, I think I'm having an episode of some kind. I just kept thinking to myself, in 3 buses and 7 hours, I'll be home. I will just go to sleep, and I'll be fine. My belongings are likely set aside at home, despite my having checked them off on my kit list in Whitby. I leave to get my first bus. At the stop I started chatting with a local woman who lived near the bus stop about traffic, as you do. She said she saw me at 6 a.m. heading up the road to the woods. I told her I was asleep and it couldn't have been me. She just smiled and then stopped talking to me, only thinking back, do I find this significant? I was able to get home with no issue. I slept for 36 hours in a deep, dreamless slumber. Bliss. When I finally woke up, it was 2 a.m. First thought was coffee and internet. I went into the living room, and my normally super chill cat was batting its paws under the closed kitchen door, making some awful noises that I hadn't heard her make before. I needed to go into the kitchen anyway, and it could be a mouse or something. Check the kitchen, all clear, but it's freezing in there despite the window being shut. I started making my coffee, and chill cat was just making constant chittering noises, looking over my shoulder. I checked behind me, no bugs, nothing of interest. When I went to close the kitchen door, I felt strong resistance. This door is loose as duck, there should be 0. Okay. I looked around for chill cat, she was on the table staring dead into my soul. Then the living room door opened, and chill cat trotted in her usual, dopey manner. I looked at the table, nothing. What the duck, maybe I slept too much. Is this what stress does to a person? I sat and drank my coffee in silence, waiting for something to happen. Nothing does. After an hour I started to relax and look at phone, it's about 5 a.m. I notice the living room door is open, but I'm too focused on a post. I see my partner's head pop around the door and then leave it ajar. I jump up and follow him. I'm excited, and I really want to tell him about my trip since I haven't had a chance, so I follow him to the bedroom. But he is wrapped up in bed, hard asleep. I swear it only took me 5 seconds. How is he asleep already? Duck it, back to bed, today is already too much. I get a few more hours of sleep, but it's nightmares again. This time it was my skin being removed. After I woke up, I ran to the living room to tell my partner about all that had been happening. I walked into the living room, and he looked like shit, really drained. Before I unloaded my concerns on him, I asked him what was wrong. He then proceeded to tell me about the nightmares he had that night, and it ducking floored me. He described the same kind of nightmares I've been having since the night in Whitby. He also mentioned that he saw me in the hallway this morning, even though I wasn't there. So I think this isn't an episode since it's now happening to more than just me. What do I think it is? I think it's something that mimics objects. And people. It wrecked my tent and stole my clothes. It probably wanted me to take it to a place with more things and people to mimic. I think it wants attention. Since I've been back home, people are saying they have already seen me or that they saw me right before they saw me. Any advice or anything that might help me understand what is happening? I've lived in the woods almost my whole life. So, for context, I don't live in the woods right now, but I did growing up. I was born in a busy mid-sized city, but then when I was almost 3, we moved to a small rural town in my state. I lived there from that age to 18, then moved to a suburb right outside of the city. Then, for 10 months, very recently I stayed with my best friend and her family in the same small town I'd grown up in. I'd go back and forth from both houses. If you know anything about living in a rural town, it can be very creepy at night. I have always found a serene beauty in the woods during the daytime. However, they instill a sense of fear in me at night due to my superstitious nature and the uncertainty of what might be lurking there. Can't possibly just be animals, dude. Anyway, so I always loved exploring the woods behind my childhood home during the day. It was so beautiful. I never felt unsafe or had a bad feeling about the woods behind my childhood home. But the woods behind my best friend's house, now that's an entirely different story. Again, during the day they won't bother me, but at night, you could not pay me enough to go into those woods. The noises that come from those woods are downright creepy. I've heard screams and yells, and my best friend will say it's just animals, very well could be, but I don't always buy that. They sometimes sound extremely human. And I work with kids, so I know what a damn scream sounds like. I hear them all day. So, my best friend's bathroom toilet, they only had one bathroom, of course, was out of commission for a while, and they had to set up a porta-potty outside in the meantime. It sucked having to go outside at night in those creepy woods even for just a minute or two. I always had to bring my phone with me, of course, and play videos. However, I have encountered a few experiences that I cannot simply attribute to a stray animal or someone playing a prank on me. A few months ago, while I was outside using the restroom, I began to hear some disturbing scratching noises. They were right against the door to the porta-potty, and they didn't sound very human. I thought maybe it was their dog, but I knew he was inside sleeping because I had seen him. Then I thought it was an animal, but as I've lived in the woods almost my whole life, I was very aware an animal wouldn't just come up near the porta-potty if they knew a human was in there. The animals we have around here, like deer, bobcats, and coyotes, are skittish. They won't really approach humans, especially not at night. Anyway, so I was scared absolutely shitless. Less because, what the duck was that? And I was so scared to leave the bathroom. So scared I'd get snatched. Then I started to hear whispering and laughter, and I really got scared. I left the bathroom, and absolutely no one was around, and everyone else was asleep. I ran right back in the house and didn't feel better until I got to bed beside my best friend because I was too scared to sleep alone that night. This used to happen a lot too. So genuinely WTF. I think it's really those woods specifically. My best friend will want me to stay over occasionally now that I've fully moved back into my house in the suburbs, but I just can't do it. I'm far too uneasy. I can't even say why. I didn't feel this way when I was at their house, even 4 years ago. It's just now. It's like I'm being watched. I saw things that genuinely haunt me to this day, but no one believes me. Hi guys. I decided to share a few of the encounters. This is certainly the most bizarre one, and it is definitely hard to believe. After spending the whole summer at my friend's, village, I really missed hanging out there every day as school started. It got to a point where I was dreaming about the village every night. Once I had a nightmare about going out at night as usual into the woods. There I saw a dark shadow-like figure standing next to the path that leads into the forest. It wasn't hostile, it was just standing there. I can't explain what it looked like, it was like everything and nothing all at once. I just can't point out anything about its appearance. After I woke up, I called Adam to tell him about this. He told me he had similar dreams where he was in the village at night and saw the thing. Of course, I didn't believe him and asked him to describe the place where he saw it. In my dream it was next to a path at night where the branches of the bushes formed a gate-like thing, and yeah, you can guess, he said the same. He told me he knows where this place could be, so we did what 15-year-olds would do, we decided to look for it. At night. After a few hours of wandering around we gave up. On our way back home we took the longer path from the forest to Adam's house. Adam had one more idea about where we should check, so we went there. It was around 2 a.m. when we got to the edge of the woods, and there it was, the exact same opening we saw in our dreams. Mind you, we have been here before, but we never dared to enter the forest because we started getting goosebumps and tearing up every time we wanted to go in. We laughed it off this time and headed to the entrance. We were around 30 meters away when Adam suddenly let out a faint gasp and fell to his knees. He could barely speak and was just pointing at his back. I helped him stand up and dragged him back to the road. Once he could breathe normally, he told me he felt a sharp pain in his back, like he had just fallen meters and landed on his back. He could barely move and was coughing after every sentence he said. Side note, the road we were on during this time crosses a field and lies next to the big forest. There are lots of bugs, birds, and even a few cows in the area, so it's noisy even at night. Well, suddenly it got dead ducking silent. As soon as we noticed this, I grabbed Adam and ran as fast as we could. We reached the first house of the village. It has motion sensors on every side. If motion outside the fence is detected, the lights turn on, cameras, and a high fence. While running, Adam suddenly stopped and grabbed me to lie down. He said, "Man, look what the duck that is." The light above the fence turned on, and there it was, a thing walking on 4 legs with a round head and long limbs. It was moving, like when a human tries walking on all 4s. I know this sounds fake, but really, trust me. So as we were lying there, I thought to myself, it must be a deer or a dog, we are not in a horror movie. As I was about to stand up, Adam whispered, "Where did it go?" "Yeah, it climbed the fence." The fence had barbed wire and was around 3 meters tall. Then the lights on the house turned on and then off. Then the lights across the house. This went on for a few minutes. That thing was moving so fast, it took a few seconds for it to get from one side of the fence to the furthest one. They are approximately 200 meters apart. Around 5 to 6 minutes have passed when the thing just straight up appeared out of nowhere. We could catch one last glimpse of it hurling itself towards the forest and then disappearing again. We got up and didn't stop until we got home. We locked the doors, grabbed everything that could be used for self-defense, and didn't go to sleep until sunrise. There is another guy in the village who saw this thing too, but he is famous for drinking and getting high every day, so yeah. The dreams, the forest, the unexplained pain in Adam's back, and the thing together are just too much to process. I really can't say anything else. This is what happened, and that's it. Did you guys hear or see something similar? My weird experience. My story is when I was 15, staying at my granddad's village house during the summer. The house was near a forest, with the nearest neighbor a 10-minute walk away. My whole family, including my grandparents, had gone to a wedding, but I chose to stay at home and have fun. That night, I was watching a classic Jackie Chan movie on TV. As you can guess, it was a regular action film. Suddenly, I felt something staring at me from behind, accompanied by a strange sound, like a mix of a rat's squeak and a snake's hiss. At first, I was too scared to look back. But the sound grew closer, and the presence felt stronger. When I finally turned around, the noise stopped, and nothing was there. I convinced myself my mind was playing tricks on me and went back to the movie. About 15 minutes later, the feeling returned. It was the same eerie sensation accompanied by the same unsettling sound. I was pissed off. I turned around again. Nothing. Literally ducking nothing. I searched the room, moving furniture, looking for any sign of an animal. A snake, rat, bat, frog, or even a spider. Something I could kill to put my mind at ease. But there was nothing, not even a fly or mosquito. Then I noticed the window was open. It faced the forest directly, which made me uneasy. My grandma used to tell me stories about that old forest and the strange things that happened to people there. But the window had a fly screen, and the curtains were drawn, so no animal or insect could have gotten in. I returned to the movie, but a few minutes later, it happened again. This time, the sound was much closer, maybe a meter away. I was terrified. I turned my head, and once again, there was nothing. How could this be possible? It kept happening, over and over, until I was too scared to sleep. I waited for morning and left the house as soon as I could. If I had owned that place, I would have burned the house and the entire forest down. What could it have been? I still don't have an answer. Wondering if anyone else has ever experienced anything like this? Every night our final dog walk happens somewhere between 11:30 p.m. and 3 a.m., depending on our day's schedule. It's always just me and the dog, a totally empty street, and the occasional car that passes. A couple years back, while on that final walk, it was probably a little after 1 a.m., the dog had just finished his business, and we turned to begin the walk back to the house. I suddenly had an intense feeling of being watched. As we came past the couple of cars that were parked on our side of the street and the view opened up so that I could see the neighbor's house across the street from ours, I could see a very tall man, just standing, turned towards us, a few feet behind that neighbor's parked truck. My first thought was that it was the neighbor who lives there, since he is pretty tall, but it still gave me an eerie feeling. As we got closer, I could tell that it wasn't our neighbor, because it was even taller and much thinner. Our neighbor is pretty muscular and thick. As we got even closer, I had a realization that gave me kind of a jolt. There is a street light in front of our yard that illuminates everything in the vicinity, even all the way through our neighbor's yard to their house is lit up. This tall, thin, male-looking silhouette was not. I've seen the occasional human walker at night, and they are never in shadow at this particular part of our street, so I knew it wasn't a person. The closer I walked, the more it looked almost like this silhouette was straight up absorbing the light instead of reflecting it like everything else. Seriously, it was far, far darker than any other shadows being cast. It didn't make any moves, but its body posture showed that it was watching me. Plus, I could feel it watching, even before I saw it, and the closer I got, the more threatening it felt. I would usually walk all the way to our driveway before turning to walk to our house, but that would have put me directly across the street from it, so I headed up the next door neighbor's driveway to cut through our yard and put as much distance between us as possible, yet it still felt way too dangerously close. I kept watching over my shoulder as I unlocked our door, and it never did move, it just seemed to watch. Since I knew that it was not another human out there, I tried to convince myself that it was just some trick of the light, which somewhere deep down I knew it wasn't. Then I've spent the last couple of years checking that exact spot every night when I take the dog out, thinking that maybe if it repeats, I can be brave enough to have a closer look and find the optical illusion. It has never repeated, and at this point it's difficult to keep my denial going. I really think someone or something was watching us that night. Side note, our dog is not the brightest and is oblivious to pretty much everything on walks, except other dogs and the scents they leave behind, so he was completely unaware of anything out of the ordinary, like he typically is. Has anyone else ever experienced anything similar? I and my mom saw a burst of light. It was at night. My mom and I usually walk the dog around 9 p.m. While we were walking, we walked past the forest that stands to our right side. In the big forest by our house, we saw a burst of colors: blue, red, purple, and green. I specifically remember seeing the blue and red vividly. We both saw it and stopped dead in our tracks in disbelief. We live in Virginia, Reston, Virginia, to be specific. We both just stared into the forest and at each other. Mind you, we were so close to the light. Neither of us felt sick after we glanced around our neighborhood. No one's windows were open, and all the blinds were closed. We didn't speak after that, we just walked back to the house and started shouting for my dad Lowell. We asked if he caught anything on our Ring camera. He usually has it on when we do our nightly walks with the dog, but he didn't. It was a ball of colorful light, and it vanished about 2 seconds later. We looked into the forest to see if there was anything further down that could explain it. It was by a tree, the brightest light I've ever seen in my life. My mother saw it too. It almost reminded me of a disco ball, only it was so bright that I couldn't distinguish what it was fast enough before it disappeared. It's like my brain couldn't comprehend what we saw. West Virginia. It all really started in the summer of 2001 for our family. Our family moved to this farm in 1991. For 10 years, we would hear things in the woods behind our home. The kids were little then and weren't allowed out of the yard. I didn't worry too much about what was out there. We would go for hikes on the hill, up until 1997. In the fall of '97, while I was hiking up on the ridge line with the kids, we heard a very loud growl that echoed through the hilltops, and it came from right behind us, over a small dip in the hill. We left immediately and never went back without my husband with us. In the summer of 2001, my kids, names and ages at that time, Sarah 12, Rachel 11, Katie 9, and Jonathan 6 were playing out back in the field. Since they were older, they were allowed to wander around some in the nearby woods, creek, and the neighbor's field. They were playing out behind our home, across the field, at the creek. Our dog Sam was with them. All of a sudden, a loud crashing sound was heard above them in the woods. Something was coming straight down the hillside towards them, crashing through the trees. The kids couldn't see what it was, the trees were so dense. It sounded big. Very big. The kids were terrified, and Sam, the dog, took off after whatever it was. When Sam chased after it, the creature changed direction. It was no longer heading straight down the hillside toward the kids. Instead, it circled around the hillside with the dog closely pursuing it. The kids came running inside to tell me what had happened. I was just glad whatever it was took off the other way when the dog gave chase. I was worried about the dog, of course, but knew he could take care of himself. I wasn't going looking for him, that's for sure. About 2 hours later, Sam finally came back. He was covered in some kind of stinky slime. He was covered head to toe with it. The slime had a horrible smell to it. 2 days later, early in the morning, I had the windows open. It was sunny and cool. I was standing at a window that faces the back hill, where the huge animal was heard running a few days before. Our dogs, Sam and Big Dog, were sleeping right below the window in the yard. A few seconds later, I heard a loud bellow-type yell/scream/growl directly in front of me on the hillside. The dogs heard it too. They jumped up and took off after whatever it was, barking madly. I told the kids they weren't allowed to play on the hillside or creek until we found out what it was that was up there. Like most kids, they didn't listen and took off for the hillside. Sarah and Rachel were playing around toward the left of the hill, while Katie and Jonathan had taken off around the bend to the right. Katie and John had the wild idea to scare the older girls by hiding down in the weeds, waiting for the girls to walk by, and jumping out at them. While waiting for the older girls, Katie and John heard something coming down the hill towards them. Thinking it was Sarah and Rachel, They stayed down in their hiding place a minute or two more. Katie then jumps up, not to be met face to face with her sisters, but face to face with Bigfoot. Yes, Bigfoot. It was about 10 yards away and sitting on a fallen tree. It was sitting as if a human would. Katie screamed, and John jumped up then to see it too. They said it was a very dirty grayish color. It had long hair all over. Jonathan distinctly remembers it had dingleberries hanging off its backside as they watched it take off running back up the hillside. I'm not sure who was more scared. My kids, or Bigfoot. Katie and Jonathan then ran down the hillside, screaming, with Sarah and Rachel following. They were scared to death. I had them both draw me a picture of what they saw. I separated them in different rooms so they wouldn't copy. I wanted to make sure they weren't telling stories. They drew identical pictures. I know they were telling the truth, just by Jonathan's reaction to what he saw. He had nightmares for weeks and will not, to this day, go into the woods without an adult with him, and he is 11 years old now. A couple of days later, the older girls went back up on the hill to check and see if there was any evidence of Bigfoot. After a few minutes, something up the hill above them was throwing huge rocks down on them. I'm not talking about little pebbles and such. I'm talking big rocks. As big as your head came sailing through the air at them from up the hillside. They ran home, and fast. About a month later, at the end of July, I was taking a hike on the hill with my kids, my mom and dad, and my brother. Safety in numbers, I have always heard. We were following a dirt road that runs across the ridge line. On the left of us, the property line is divided with a barbed wire fence. On the right, it slopes downhill, into a cleared off hillside. Then about 50 feet below, multiflora rose bushes have grown up, and then the woods begin. I am walking about 100 feet ahead of the rest of the family, along with Sarah. Our dog Puff was walking at my side. We hear some rustling in the thorn bushes below us. At first, I'm thinking, cows. We have a few heads of cattle on the farm, roaming. In addition, we are walking in their pasture area. Anyway, Puff also heard it and perked up, looking over the hillside towards the right. Puff starts barking and takes off down the hill. I know then it is not a cow. Puff doesn't chase cows. Sarah and I then see a head, a hairy head and shoulders, standing above the multiflora rose bushes. It takes off down the hillside towards the trees, with Puff on its heels. Whatever this thing was, it was taller than the bushes, which we later went down and judged to be at least 8 or 9 feet tall, and this thing stood a head taller than the bushes. It was a reddish-brown color. Not the gray the kids saw. Therefore, we have more than one around here. I have told several family members and friends what we have seen. They think we are crazy. I know there is something out there. I was like most people, I didn't believe in such things. Until I saw it with my own eyes. I went hiking in the wilderness and was haunted by something hiding amongst the hills. Each year I put aside time for myself. Away from everyone, away from everything. No distractions, no problems. I don't have to worry about council tax or the fact that the mechanical car park gates are broken again and I can't get to work for the second time this month. No modern world issues. The cold autumnal wind swept through the Lake District, UK, like an army conquering a new land. I used to hate it, but now it just feels like an old friend pushing me along. I'd been sleeping in a small one-man tent for the past 3 days, but the night before the incident I'd managed to tear a massive hole in it by not properly storing it away. It got caught on a rogue thorn bush I passed through, and the tiny bush ripped through my night's protection. Luckily, around the Lake District remain old Bothys. For those who don't know what a Bothy is, it's a small building that remains unlocked so people traveling through have somewhere to stay for the night in events such as mine. They aren't typically used much, as people usually have a tent or don't really camp much in general out in the hills. Luck isn't usually on my side, but shortly after tearing my tent, I continued my walk up to the peak of a hill and spotted one of these Bothys sitting peacefully on top of a smaller hill just below me. Even though it was only 4 p.m. and the sun was still up, I didn't want to continue walking and risk not finding shelter again. According to my phone, I was still another 5 or 6 miles away from an inn or hotel. The Bothy was old. Very old. Dangerously old. It was only about 4 meters high, with a mix of stone, wood, and straw acting as a makeshift roof. Thinking upon it now, that roof could have caved in if I had sneezed too hard. The door had rotted away and fallen to the floor, where over time it had slowly begun to disintegrate and perish as we all do. My father always used to say, everything is a prisoner to time. That little line came to me as I entered the Bothy. The pure darkness inside the Bothy struck me. While I usually would have found it menacing, today I welcomed the embrace of the unknown. If no light could get in, neither could the wind or rain. I gently set down my gear on the floor. There wasn't a huge amount of space. It had to be about 4 meters by 6 meters. I pinged open the buckle on my backpack and gently drew out my now defunct tent. I decided to pin it to the door frame with some pegs. I had so at least if it did rain, the tent material would stop a majority of it from flying through the doorway. I felt very clever. I remember looking at my watch and being shocked at the fact it was now 5:30 p.m. I don't know how pinning a broken tent up has taken this much time, but it has. I cracked out my portable stove and carefully lit it. I had the usual beans and sausages out of a foil pack that night. After a day of walking, anything tasted good. I had sat back against the wall and slowly closed my eyes as I attempted to get comfy and rest for a minute before getting my sleeping bag out. I was woken up by a loud cracking from right in front of me. I woke up quite quickly thinking someone had snuck into the Bothy with me. I have had my things stolen in the past by other campers while I slept, so it wouldn't surprise me if it happened again. Like a fool, I had left the gas stove on. I felt like an idiot. I could have caused a lot of damage. I pushed against the wall behind me, and I rocked forward onto my knees and carefully turned it off. I leaned back, sat on my knees, and let out a sigh. A small stone plopped down in front of me with a gentle tap. Silence flooded the cool air. I looked up and saw that a few stones from the wall in front of me had fallen out of position and onto the floor. It appeared to be pitch black outside. Which didn't surprise me. When I saw something back away quickly from the hole and vanish, allowing moonlight to flood into the Bothy, that's when I was surprised. To be honest, I was more shitting myself than just surprised. I let out a gentle scream. I pushed myself back against the wall. I had been sleeping. Something rustled at the makeshift tent door. A withered black hand slowly released the sides of the stone doorway and retreated back out of the structure. "Who's out there? I would appreciate you not mucking around. If you want to come in, just knock," I shouted with a veil of bravery and confidence. The stone structure shook as short, violent knocks bounced all around the outside of the Bothy. It started out quietly but quickly crescendoed to bone-shaking smashing all around the structure. I sat there wanting to be anywhere else. I missed my girlfriend, I missed my cozy bed, and I missed civilization. I was fully processing the reality that I might die out in some little stone hut in the middle of nowhere. I cried and begged and pleaded. Stones expelled themselves from the walls and the ceiling, most punched me on the way down, allowing beams of light to pierce the ancient shelter. "Just let me live," I screamed out after several minutes in one final burst of desperation. The knocking stopped abruptly. I felt air gently brush the back of my ear from one of the holes a fallen stone had left in the wall behind me. "No," whispered the overlapping voices of 100 people at once in my ear. I watched through the holes in the walls as hundreds of black shadows flew past, back and forth, around the outside of the Bothy. The white light of the night was blocked by their corrupt forms flying around me. I could feel my entire body shaking. The cold had penetrated my very skeleton and frozen my very nature. Fear had quickly sunk its nails into my mind and soul. Logical thought, feeling, and sense had been cut out of me. Despair took control. I pushed myself to my feet, ignoring the searing pain from bloody heels, and quickly lunged for my makeshift tent door. I grabbed the green cloth in my hand and violently ripped it from the pegs it hung by. 100 empty figures huddled before me, one with her face almost touching mine. Twilight skin slowly dripped from them, muscles displayed carelessly, jaws detached, and bones bent out of shape. The woman whose face was almost touching mine had a single glittering tear trickle down her decaying face. I looked her straight in the eye and only saw the void. With a single touch to the chest, I was thrown to the floor. My head smashed against my portable metal hob, and I lost consciousness. I awoke at about 6 a.m. The morning rain had wriggled itself between my lips and into my mouth, causing me to choke and splutter awake. I sat in a box of stones. The structure I had entered the previous evening had vanished, leaving only an outline of a few stones in the grass around me where the foundations had stood. I grabbed my portable stove and the bits I had unpacked and quickly departed. I carried most of it in my arms, caring little about things getting wet, and ran to the nearest town. A few hours later I had managed to settle down in a nearby inn. The old woman working there had taken pity and let me in despite my dismal appearance. The inn was cozy and quiet. A small fire danced in the fireplace just for me and the old woman. After a warm drink and a sit by the fire, she had come over to me and asked if I was okay. She was fairly old, in her late 60s if I had to guess. I told her she wouldn't believe my story, and she sat down in the armchair opposite me and listened. I reached the end of my story fully expecting her to disprove it with logic or say the classic "you must have been hallucinating or dreaming or lying," but instead I received an accepting nod. I asked her about her casual response. She gently rubbed the bridge of her nose. She explained that I wasn't the first hiker to have come through the village traumatized by something, but I was the first to admit what I had seen in a very long time. She retold to me a story that her great-grandfather had told her grandmother. The story goes that a woman had been chased over the hills a few centuries ago by a village of about 100. Her crime was witchcraft. There was, of course, no proper proof she was a witch. She was simply a woman who refused the advances of a male elder in the village. She also had a baby with a man who had died before the child's birth that she cared for. The child and the woman fled the village in the night, followed by the hissing horde of villagers fueled by hatred and the thrill of the hunt. They chased the woman all night before finally cornering her in an old stone bothy. She begged for her life. She wept and screamed, begging that they let her and her child go. In response, the villagers pushed and smashed against the outside of the bothy until it collapsed in on both the woman and her baby. Both perished underneath a tomb of insignificant rocks. With that, the old woman shrugged and got up out of the armchair and gently laid her hand on my shoulder. I don't know if that will explain anything, she let out with a sigh and sorrow in her eyes. She offered me a room for the night and a cheap meal. She said in return for the cheap meal, she would have to leave the town early the next day, interact with no one else, and go home. She walked away and uttered under her breath, "I don't want them following you to my inn." 2 stories from Filmont, New Mexico, a year apart. This story is in 2 parts, a year apart from each other. If you haven't heard of Filmont, New Mexico, then here is a basic overview. It's a backpacking camp for Boy Scouts on about 7,000 plus acres of land. It's a whole lot of fun and absolutely beautiful. The first half of my experience was as a participant, and the following year, I returned as a ranger. We had just started our 10-day trek and were camping out at the site known as Indian Writings. Late at night, my best friend and I were brushing our teeth and chatting for a bit. Everyone in the group we were in had gone to sleep, and we were hanging out about 50 yards away from the tents. As we're talking, all of a sudden, we start to hear a female voice start to sing just over this small little hill. Now understand, we were in the middle of the wilderness, and the only girl we had on our crew was asleep before all of us, and I doubt she would ever sing. It wasn't singing anything in particular. Just a basic chord. The sound moved up and down repeatedly. I would say it was about 10 to 15 yards away from us, and we could hear it clear as day as I turned to him and asked, to make sure I wasn't going crazy, if he was hearing it too. I tell him we should investigate. He looks at me and says, "You know how horror movies start? Horror movies start by us looking for that noise. You know how horror movies don't start? By us going back to our tents and going to sleep." I really couldn't argue with that logic, so we did. The voice was still singing as we left. Still don't know what that was. Follow up the next year. I'm working as a ranger, and I have a crew with me, 1 mile away at Anasazi. Just as we were about to go to sleep, I noticed that a bear bag from another crew had slipped and was within reach, which is not acceptable, so I instructed my crew to start hauling it up. It was one of those extremely dark, cloudy nights, so no moon and no stars. Your flashlight illuminated only what you could see. The crew leader comes out of the darkness, and he just looks pale. He was standing a short distance away from the rest of the crew when he saw a figure run in front of him, slow down slightly to change direction, and then run out of his sight and back into the darkness. Meanwhile, everyone else in the crew was with me putting these bear bags up. I hadn't told him about what I heard the year before, but if you've been on the Indian Writings tour, you'd know that the valley has a bit of a violent history. Who knows what that was? Hope you enjoyed. Spirit seen in the woods. This happened back in the 1930s near a rural village in Armenia. First, I will have to give you a little background. My great-grandmother was about 10 years old and was living in a village hours away from the capital city of Yerevan. She was very sick and was suffering from severe stomach aches. The village doctor was unable to figure out what was wrong with her. It got so bad that her parents decided to travel for hours to the capital city of Yerevan in hopes of seeing a doctor at a better facility who might be able to help. After seeing a doctor in the capital city, he said that he hasn't dealt with anything so strange before. She had no signs of inflammation, wasn't using the bathroom much, and the medicine and treatment that the doctor was giving her were not helping at all. Then again, this was the 1930s in the Soviet Union and Armenia, so there definitely wasn't anything even remotely close to what we have available today. After having no luck in the capital city and returning back to her village, the pain started getting even worse. She and her family were extremely sad. Her parents were already preparing themselves to cope with the possibility of her death. One day it was so bad that my great-grandmother ventured out into the woods without telling anyone with a plan to end self. When she got to the location in the woods where she was planning to end herself, the pain got so bad that she collapsed and fainted. This is where it gets weird. Apparently, when she fainted, she saw a tall man in a large white robe approach her. She wasn't able to move. He came up to her and said, "Where does it hurt?" She pointed to her stomach. The man began rubbing her stomach and then told her, "If you tell anyone that you saw me, bad things will happen. You can't let anyone know about this," he warned before disappearing. My great-grandmother woke up, and all of a sudden her stomach pains were gone. She returned to her village, and everyone was amazed and shocked to see her being normal and free of this pain. Her parents really believed that it was God answering their prayers. However, my great-grandmother did not tell anyone about the man that she saw. Fast forward about 70 years later, in 2001, my great-grandmother was in her 80s. She went, literally, her whole life without telling anyone of the experience she had. She was living in Moscow, Russia, with my grandmother, who was 52 at the time. One day, my great-grandmother shared this story with my grandmother and my grandmother's older sister. That same night, just hours later, she suffered a stroke in her sleep and ended up passing away. I was 7 years old and was living in the United States with my family. We moved to Seattle when I was about 4 years old, so though I've met her, I don't remember her since I was so young. Who was that man in the white robe? If it weren't for him, my great-grandmother would have most likely gone through with ending herself, and I wouldn't be here writing this right now. I don't usually believe in spirits or otherworldly beings, but I think about this story a lot, and so does my grandmother. If anyone else has witnessed anything similar, I'd love to hear about it. Something was watching me and my sister while we were in the woods. This is about what has happened in the past 2 months around my grandparents' property that they've had for the past 40 years. This story may sound fake, but I haven't been documenting any of the happenings down in writing, so I'm going completely off memories and shared experiences of me and my family. So this may sound insane, but after what just happened last night, I'm almost 100% sure there is an aggressive apparition of some kind haunting the woods around my house. To understand why I would think this, I have to start where it started and has continually gotten worse. First off, 2 months ago or so, my sister and I went outside to walk around out of boredom. We acknowledged that it was extremely bright, with a large, beaming full moon filling the usual darkness of the 40-acre property and unseen atmosphere. As soon as my sister, which I'll call Pony, turns around to face me, something big, white, and fast runs directly behind her and past her back. Pony and I started screaming, and I sprinted faster back than ever, as did she. I tried to think about what that creature could have been, but it didn't make sense why a deer or almost any animal would wait so long to run past us, especially considering that it appeared to be only 2 to 3 inches away from her back as it passed. Later on, although we'd been fearful and on edge, we continued to walk around outside with the scariest things happening in the back pasture. A few days, probably closer to a week, my sister and I headed down the pasture to go out and explore. It's a beautiful area but completely quiet and empty. It's a scene of tall, full trees, especially right past this shallow/dried creek lined with a wall of trees. Pony and I started messing around and taking pictures together and joking around, especially about a patch of grass shaped almost like a perfect circle, looking as if the grass had been set on fire. We joked it was an occult circle or that there was something under the dirt. However, just a few minutes later, we heard what sounded like water rushing and flowing heavily through the creek out of nowhere. As we stopped to listen, we realized it hadn't rained in a few weeks at the time. Suddenly, our ears were filled with the sound of a man shrieking for help at the highest pitch possible, a noise unlike anything I had ever heard before. Pony and I scrambled like never before to get back through the barbed wire fence separating our backyard and the pasture my grandfather owns, with the screaming only stopping after we were unable to see down the pasture. For a couple days after that, I refused to leave the house and go do anything back outside out of fear. But eventually we went back out there to see and investigate, and for a week or two we only heard footsteps that don't exactly sound like they make sense, especially since it sounds like a person or animal walking in circles right past the trees by my garage door. Alternatively, there were also sounds that could be easily explained by the presence of numerous stray cats parading around my grandparents' house. Until we were left home one random day by our grandparents and only we two were there, we started to hear what sounded like something huge start scratching at the largest kitchen window, moving around from different sides every few minutes, making me almost 99% sure it wasn't a cat. Additionally, my grandma's little dog was freaking out and shaking. I don't think it could have been an animal, as it also sounded much higher up on the window than a cat would be able to reach and was scratching back and forth. It nearly scared us to death as we tried to use fire pokers as makeshift weapons in case it decided to try and get inside. The noise only stopped when my grandparents returned home, which was at most 1 to 2 weeks later. A day or two after that, I had headed into the garage to grab a drink from our second fridge, only to stand there for 15 seconds or so trying to focus on what I was seeing outside the window to see what I believed was something wanting to figure out how to pull the window open, as, from what I saw, it looked like it was pulling down on the top of the window. With context, the garage window is also about 2 to 3 feet taller than I am. With me being 5 feet 5 inches, I didn't scream this time, but I sprinted out of there to close the door, which shut with a slam, getting me screamed at. And with no other excuse, I explained what I saw to my grandmother, but she didn't believe me. During this last week of school before Christmas break, I have been taking finals and returning home early every day while my grandparents go run errands. Now this has only started happening badly during the day this week, with me repeatedly hearing knocking and tapping on the doors and windows in sets of 3s and 4s slowly, with no trees or anything being close enough to do any of that to any of those areas. When Pony was finally out of school, we walked to the barn closest to the pasture, where we heard strange rustling sounds, not just this last time but multiple times before, as something heavy moved back and forth or in circles within the bushes out of our sight. And when we left to walk away, my sister Pony swore she saw something similar to what I saw in the garage window peek from the right side, and then I saw a dark, brownish, mixed with gray-skinned, long, and unnatural figure peek from around the corner, placing its long, unnatural fingers around the barn, keeping its hand there while pulling its head away after I screamed. Just yesterday, Pony and I received confirmation that we weren't going crazy. With us being bored, we decided to go play hide and seek and explore for the fun of things. Since my sister had 2 of her friends over, we decided to play hide and seek. We had a giant flashlight as well as multiple phone flashlights. We walked not even 60 feet away from the cars parked in front of the house and looked through the tree line the closest to the road from the house as we started to get less scared as we saw and heard nothing until I could hear 1 clap followed by 2 more, making my heart absolutely drop. I whispered to Pony and her friends repeatedly, "We need to run and go back inside, that isn't an animal clapping." It was coming from the exact direction the light was pointed in the tree line. Of course we all went running to the door back inside the house, choosing to head back out and just see if we heard anything else. As we scanned the area from closer to the house, the light landed in an old area that used to keep animals a couple of decades ago. It is overgrown and shrouded with bushes, vines, and overgrown vegetation. We hear what sounds like a woman beginning to let out a similar shrieking scream, just not begging for help like the last one. Additionally, it seemed to be only about 50 feet away from us, much closer than the original scream we heard, which sounded like it was just beyond the creek tree line. We ran and all heard the same screaming, confirming it's not just fear messing with my sisters and my heads. I find this entire situation to be insane, and I need to know how I can possibly get rid of these entities that seem to be following me, my mom, and my sister. I would appreciate any advice or suggestions from individuals who have experienced similar situations or who can explain what is happening and what these entities are. What's in my woods? Central New York. My parents and I lived in the suburbs of North Syracuse, New York, until I was 11, 2012. There was a Vietnamese woman who would frequently ask my father for help with physical tasks. She would knock on our door and, with her distinct accent, call out, "Jimmy," followed by more knocks, "Jimmy," and then again, "Jimmy." Very sweet lady. We moved about 30 minutes away, to Fulton, New York, near the Oswego County line, where it's mostly rural, because we had bought a horse. There are woods in front of the house across the road. And there are woods behind the backyard as well. Our backyard is probably 2 acres, and the woods come up to it to create a straight tree line. The remaining 11 acres of our property consist of those woods. Our neighbors' property lines also meet in the woods. We all own portions of the woods. The first encounter happened maybe a year into living there. I was maybe 12 or 13. I had my friend Anna over at the house to spend the night. We were brushing the horse in the barn and walked back to the house, which was only 50 feet away. That's when I heard Anna's mom call her name from the tree line, based on the sound of her voice. We both looked at each other and didn't need to say anything before we bolted to the back door of my house. That's because her mom was over 20 miles away in Baldwinsville, New York. By car it would be 20-ish minutes away. The second encounter was something my father had. He's a skeptic, mind you. He was home alone with the dogs while the rest of us were at work or school. I was maybe 14 or 15 at the time. He says he was busy doing chores and didn't think too much of it when he heard the knocking at the front door. Knock, Jimmy, knock, Jimmy, knock, Jimmy. The dogs were reacting to the knocking, and my dad says that's why he didn't really question it. He went to the door, and no one was there. The third encounter was more recent. And actually my boyfriend has had an experience with something else in the house as well that he says is benevolent. Moving on to his not so benevolent experience. This was last year. I'm 24 now. He's been living with us since we recently had a baby. He says he was walking to his car, it was early morning, and the sun was barely up, so it was still pretty dark. From the tree line that's across the road, in front of the house, he heard a woman calling out his name. He, of course, didn't give it any attention and got in his car as soon as he got the chance. His second experience, I guess, wasn't too long after that. He was home alone with our dogs. 2 Australian shepherds that rarely howl. He was watching TV in the bedroom when he heard them howling in the living room. He thought he heard a female singing. And he continued to hear it even after muting the TV and listening closer. When he opened the bedroom door, however, it stopped. But he recently told me that he also saw a shadowy figure sitting with the dogs in the living room. I haven't yet, but I do plan to. We have new neighbors that moved in about a year ago, and they're super friendly, so one of these days I plan to ask them if they've had any similar experiences. It's hard to be neighborly in a rural area, but I want to know what we experienced because I think it comes from those woods, and I doubt we're the only ones who have encountered something from there. Strange village, strange wood, haunted house. For a long time I thought I was crazy. I've heard 1 in 6 people have a paranormal encounter, but I've had quite a few. It wasn't until I was in my teens that I had something strange happen with anyone else around. This was that first time. This place was crazy weird. The stories I heard before I even went there were insane, but I'm going to keep this as short as possible, as some of it will be hard to explain. I was about 19, my best friend had become friends with a guy I'll call C. C lived with his mom, K, in a small house located in a village in Cumberland. K was really cool and would let a bunch of us hang out there. The house was built in the 50s or 60s, all the doors in the house were glass, the living room had 2 entrances with double doors, and there was a conservatory on the back of the house, which the other doors led to. At night, no matter where you stood on the ground floor, you could see everything either directly or through reflections in the conservatory. There was a small garden with a fence and then the woods. The people in the village itself were weird. We would have a nervous laugh about it being like Children of the Corn, Village of the Damned, or the League of Gentlemen. The kids in the street would stop and stare as we walked by. Shopkeepers would stop what they were doing and smile but never say a word the whole time. People walking down the street would either be mumbling or laughing to themselves. On a few occasions, they would walk until just past us, scream, and then run off down the street. As we all stood there, looking bewildered at one another, I remarked, "I trust you all understand that we are in a precarious situation here." I'm not exaggerating when I say that this was how everyone we saw on the street behaved, without fail. It was creepy, absurd, and hilarious. One day my bud and I went into the local pub, everyone stopped, turned, and looked at us. The pub was full of men in polo shirts, either navy or pastel pink. Sorry about babbling on, but you have to understand the surreal nature of this place, everywhere was weird. Anyway, it wasn't long into my first visit before we got Kay talking about some of the weird goings on, not just in the house but in the whole area. She had collected newspaper clippings from the local paper to back up some of her stories. Here are some events I can remember she told me. We also confirmed these with the neighbors. If you're familiar with the Bonnybridge UFO sightings, one of those instances involved a UFO flying near the village. The woods were well known in the area for the number of dead bodies that turned up there. It was rumored that a coven of witches practiced black magic in the woods. People said they had seen robed groups of people in the woods. White horses in nearby fields had been found stabbed to death. K and C told me one night the entire street was out in their backyards. There was chanting coming from the woods. They said it was so loud it must have been about 50 people, men and women, deep voices, and high voices. K said the creepiest part was that as soon as the chanting stopped, it would instantly start in another part of the forest, as if a group of hundreds of people were either jumping from one area to another or performing perfectly coordinated chanting in the dark. To a bunch of adventurous teenagers, this place was the shit. Kay also mentioned that strange objects had been left on the steps in the backyard, feathers and twigs tied with twine, and a couple of times robed figures standing just beyond the fence. That was all utterly mind-blowing. Then she started to tell us about the house. Both Kay and C refused to use the second-floor bathroom or go into the spare bedroom. At some point Kay had noticed scrabbling sounds coming from the loft. She assumed it was a rat or squirrel that had gotten in. Also, all the spoons in the house had started to go missing. Each time she returned to the house, another spoon was gone. Finally, when there were no spoons left, she tore the house apart, trying to find just one, with no luck. She had searched everywhere except the spare bedroom. She was pumping herself up, getting ready to go in, when she heard a bump from the loft. Oh no, she thought. There's someone living in the loft. She called the police. C had come back from a friend's house at this point, They both listened to the bumping and scrabbling as they waited for the police. Even the police heard it after they arrived. They pulled the hatch down and went in. They found nothing except all the spoons laid in a row in front of a burnt-out candle. The policeman, straight-faced, suggested she get an exorcist. They never told me why they didn't go in the other rooms, but Kay believed she was cursed, that her ex-husband had something to do with it. Despite the honesty reflected in their faces, the clippings, and my own life experiences, I was skeptical at that point. It's hard to let go of skepticism even when we started experiencing things. Often a group of us would be hanging out, watching a movie or something, when this would happen. The first time we were all sat there, gradually it dawned on me I could hear something, a perfectly natural sound. Someone was in the kitchen clearing away dishes. I could see, reflected in the conservatory windows, someone moving back and forth in the kitchen. I looked left and right, doing a head count. I felt my blood drain. I turned to my buddy and said quietly, "Who the duck is in the kitchen?" Still looking at the TV, he said, "Oh, it's, A." Quick head count, I don't ducking know. The rest of the group had begun to catch on, they saw it too. We armed ourselves with anything we could find, golf clubs, chairs, and guitars. Half of us took the hallway entrance, the other the conservatory entrance. As soon as someone could see directly into the kitchen, the noise just stopped. Clattering right up until the very last moment. None of us slept that night. However, it happened again and again. We purposely took people who had never been there and knew nothing about it and waited for them to notice, always the same without fail. Sometimes when we all decided to crash for the night, the only place left was the spare room. I went up, opened the door, and some big bastard had beaten me to it. Right there, all wrapped up in the quilt, I went back downstairs with a sigh. My bud asks me what's up, I explain. He's adamant no one is in there, pointing out where everyone is sleeping. I agree, but I'm also adamant someone is in there. We both go up, open the door, and see the quilt is flat and hanging off the bed. The second time it happened, I was with my girlfriend. She never set foot in that room again. But it wasn't just us that saw that one either. One night one of my pals was taking his sweet time in the toilet, so I decided to use the one upstairs. I walked up the stairs. I was looking down slightly, the top step came into view. It was dark, but nothing like pitch black, and there on the top step, legs in black suit trousers and a pair of polished black shoes. I tried with all my might to look up, but I couldn't do it. Nope, I just went back downstairs. One night it was C's birthday. He had a big party with loads of people. The house was packed with blaring music. At about 3 in the morning, C pulls me up to his room window. "Listen," he says. I run downstairs and grab my mate. He shuts off the music. Everyone can hear it now. Screams. 50-odd teenagers standing in a backyard and hanging out of windows in pure silence. I swear to you I will not exaggerate, this was the most blood-curdling thing I have ever heard. It sounded like a woman or a child. I tell myself it was probably a fox, but whatever was happening to the thing, I would not wish on anyone. It was crying out in pain, and it was loud. The sound would become higher pitched and pop and then gurgle and then start over again and again. Every single one of us stood there for an hour, girls started crying, and some of the guys were freaking out, but there was nothing else to do, we couldn't just keep partying with that going on. It was the sound of absolute suffering. Maybe you guys in America have heard something like that, you have big predators over there, but here, the biggest predators we have are foxes. There was no commotion or barking or shouting, just the sound of this poor thing screaming and gurgling over and over, like it was on a megaphone. In all my years camping in Scotland, I've never heard anything like that. However, the woods were beautiful in the daytime, we would walk through them often. Every time, without fail when we went to the woods during the day, high above, directly above us, 2 crows would be fighting in the sky, cawing and knocking the shit out of each other. But there was some other strange shit in there, we just referred to them as landmarks. There was an area with wooden joists that had somehow been merged into a tree, like they had grown out of it. They had nails protruding all over and were stained with a viscous black liquid. Near there were branches from separate trees that were perfectly twisted together. Strange symbols were carved into trees. Once we found large piles of white hair at the base of these trees. A ring of baby oak trees had been cut down, the stump in the center seemed to be bloodstained. There was an area where many tall tree saplings had been bent over and secured to make arches tall enough for a man to walk through. We had the place mapped out well in our heads, we knew where to go from each landmark to find the others. The area was segmented by roads too, but at night, even if we followed the compass to a T, nothing was in the right place. Fair enough, it's dark, you can get turned around, but what really gives me the creeps is that at night and only at night, about 15 feet northeast from the ring of tree stumps, is a huge U-shaped hedge about 15 feet high. The U-shape created a corridor about 30 feet long with a dead end. It was monolithic. But we could only find it at night. C had a small den he built as a kid. We hung out there for a few hours one day, just shooting the shit, then went back. The next day we returned to the den. There was a perfect 3 feet wide black circle scorched into the grass around the den. It was summer, and the grass was tall, thick, and dry. I don't know how they managed to do that. I think our constant investigating was pissing someone off. We interpreted it as a warning. Although we didn't stop completely, we began going less frequently and in smaller groups, but I don't recall much else occurring that I witnessed. I don't know if I believe in ley lines and stuff like that, but if they are real, I'm pretty sure one runs through that place. Can't shake the ominous feeling at a place I frequent in the woods. So, for my job I collect water samples in various locations in my region. I've been doing it for about 3 years. I often go alone, and of the 6 places I sample, the new site I just picked up makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. For a little context, my line of work deals with abandoned coal mines. All the other sites I sample are right off the road and are near old coal mines but not right at them. However, this one site is way back in a hollow that was heavily mined. I take 3 samples here, and the first location is what puts me on edge. It's by an old bridge, and if I had to guess, the road/bridge used to be an old rail line. It's not like I feel someone is watching me. But something seems off. I have to walk a good way away from the road and my vehicle, so I try to get out of there as quickly as possible. The other 2 samples I take here don't give me that feeling. I'm not sure if I need advice or for someone to tell me I'm not crazy. I possibly have the resources to look up the history of this area, but I haven't taken the time to do so yet. It's definitely not uncommon for people to have been ended while mining back in the day. However, when I'm not taking water samples, I'm out in the woods actually finding entrances to old mines and logging them into our inventory system, and never in my 3 years of this line of work have I had the same weird feelings that I do at this one sample site. Northeast Alabama cryptid? Something in the woods? I live near the Appalachian Mountains, and I've witnessed something weird recently. To give some perspective, I live on 467 acres in northeastern Alabama. In my area, there are very few neighbors. One is my grandparents, who have owned the land since the early 80s. We live inside of a hollow with tall mountains surrounding us on all sides. Recently someone bought one of the mountains and has converted it into an ATV park, which is pushing lots of wildlife down into our land. Deer, coyotes, etc. On November 1st my siblings went to ride on the Polaris Ranger. It was close to 10:30 when they began making the loop on the property. There's a bridge over a creek right at the start of the road that they followed. It's basically the beacon of being home. They rode in loops of the property from 10:30 until about 10:45, 11 o'clock. They began feeling off. Just a sinking feeling of dread. The oldest of the 3 felt the sinking dread first but didn't say anything. Instead, they continued making the loop with the younger 2. After completing the loop a few more times, they spotted something on the ground and stopped to investigate. This is when the second oldest began feeling a sinking feeling as well but didn't voice it. As the older said, "Don't stop, just keep driving." Well, look at the ground in the morning, and they continued making the loop. At about 11:15 they paused again to stop and read a text from our mother. When stopped, the middle one looked out across a field and saw a large creature almost 6 feet tall with 4 legs but appearing to be standing up like a human across the field. He says he locked eyes with it, and then he floored it, and they began coming home, once again not voicing that they were scared. By the time they got to the bridge, the youngest had begun crying, begging to go home. There's a gate leading into the property that must be opened and closed to come and go. The oldest got out to open this gate and said she felt that if she looked up, she would not survive what she'd see. They floored it and made it home fine. Now for more details, we have a porch dog that typically follows them each time they go. He stayed home this night and would not follow. There is also cattle on this land. They didn't see any of the cattle, nor see any sign of life. Only they were present, accompanied by the smell of smoke and the wind. While driving, they had been playing music, and just before this all occurred, the song Pumped Up Kicks began playing, which has whistling in it. When they were coming home, they described it as feeling as if they were prey and being hunted. That the thing, whatever it was right there with them, and if they stopped or turned around, they'd never make it home. When they came home, their pupils were all blown so wide you could not see the color in their eyes anymore. Since then, we've returned to the area, and nothing seems to be amiss. I say all this to ask, what could have caused this feeling? What do you think happened? Could it be a cryptid of sorts? My camping trip. So a while ago, when I was a teenager, 14 years old, I went on one of those camping trips that various companies offer during the summer. It was me, 9 other kids, and 2 counselors, who were only 5 or 6 years older than us kids. It was in the Pacific Northwest of the USA. Washington, if I remember correctly. So anyway, every day we would hike, and then, after the hike was over, we would hop back into our van, with U-Haul attached on the back, and head to a campground. We usually stayed at campgrounds that were pretty heavily populated, COAs and the like, but this one night we went to a campground where we were one of 2 groups of people. The other occupants were a young married couple. To start off with, and what really caught me by surprise, was that the campground was in the middle of the thickest forest I have ever been in. I legitimately could not see 50 feet ahead of me when walking around during the daytime. At night it was obviously much worse. Fast forward to dinner time that night. As we are all munching on our food, one girl says that she has to go to the bathroom. Since it is nighttime, and there are nighttime animals walking around everywhere doing their thing, we have to go in groups to go to the bathroom. I volunteer to go, as does another guy. The bathroom is approximately 200 yards away from our campground, so it's a bit of a walk. The sun is near done setting as we arrive at the bathroom. The girl goes in and does her business. As the other guy and I are waiting for her, we decide that it's probably smarter to go to the bathroom now rather than going in the middle of the night. So we're in there, and I, having just finished going to the bathroom, am washing my hands. The other camper is in the stall. There are 2 sinks. All of a sudden, the one I'm not using turns on. I think this is weird, but it turns off after a couple seconds. Whatever, I think, weird shit like that happens all the time. No biggie. So, the other guy finishes up, and we go out and continue to wait for the girl. It took her like 15 or 20 minutes, she must have been constipated or something. Finally she comes out, and as we're about to walk back, "It's pretty dark now," she says, "there was a woman in the bathroom with me." We respond with, "So what? Probably just that other woman in the other campground." "No," she says, "the woman in the bathroom was middle-aged. The other camper is like 20. Probably just another camper we didn't know about," says the other guy. "It can't be," I say. "This campground is tiny. We are definitely the only 2 groups here." "Whatever," I say, quickly dismissing the notion so as not to freak myself out. "We should get back, we've been gone a long time." They agree, and we keep going. At the back of my mind, though, I'm getting kind of scared. Some weird shit is going on. As we keep walking, it gets very dark. I'm not saying it is a weird dark, just that, because there aren't any cities near us, there is no glow to light up the night sky. So naturally, it is pitch black. Which is scary by itself, I would say. The girl turns around and notices a light behind us. It appears to be a flashlight. Whatever, it's probably just the other campers. By this time, we are at their site, and lo and behold, both of them. We look back, and the flashlight is out. It just disappeared. But there are definitely footsteps. I mouth the words, "Do you hear footsteps too?" They both nod. We give each other a quick glance and start sprinting back to the campsite. It's a short sprint, and we soon arrive there, ready to tell our story. I guess we trusted that we had outrun the footsteps or something, because I, for one, felt completely safe back at the campground. We slept in 4 tents, there were 4 girls and 5 guys, so 2 guys' tents and 1 girl's tent, as well as the counselors. They were all relatively near each other, all within 10 meters, I would say. So we are all trying to fall asleep. The previous flashlight encounter had completely slipped my mind by now. We are talking, as kids do, when suddenly, footsteps. The same speed as the ones before that we had heard. My tent mates start making some noise, like, "What the duck was that?" etc., but I shush them. We remain very silent, just listening. After a while they go away. It was weird, it seemed like they were just walking in place, they never got farther away from the tents. Whatever was following us left, right? Wrong. As we begin to ease back into sleep and start to doze off, I hear the worst, most horrifying cackle/laugh you can imagine. Think the opening of Feel Good Inc. by the Gorillas, just 10 times more scary. I whisper to my tent mates if they hear it. They nod. Then, I shit you not, the sound of a faucet running. It all comes rushing back to me now, the sink magically turning on and the footsteps. We sit there in silence for what felt like an hour, it probably was only like 5 minutes, until a girl's voice tentatively asks, "Did you guys hear that?" I say, why yes. Everybody's whispering to each other now. "The duck was that? I'm so scared right now," etc. Even the counselors joined in. Then, out of nowhere, the loudest siren on planet Earth goes off. I'm sure you've heard one of those bombing raid sirens they have in cities before. This was very similar. A siren? In the middle of nowhere, Washington? This can't be happening. It goes on for roughly a minute or two, then cuts off. After that, one of the counselors quietly says, "Let's get in the van, guys." I don't know how on earth I summoned up the courage to walk the 10 meters to the van, but I did. As soon as we got in, everybody was freaking the duck out. Not screaming, just a stunned silence. We all confirmed that we heard all of the noises, the faucet, the footsteps, the siren, and the cackle, and then the three of us who went to the bathroom bring up our previous encounter. By now, we're like, well, I guess this is it. We're ducked. Nice knowing you. We turn the lights of the van off, and as we do, we noticed that the couple who were camping next to us had the good sense to get the duck out of that campground. This, as you might suspect, makes us feel a hell of a lot worse, given that we are now officially the only people here. And then, out of nowhere, someone says, "Wait. Is that a person?" I look out the window, and, sure enough, there is a figure walking in the road. "Everybody, be as quiet as possible," we say, because this person, or whatever it is, definitely won't see the van full of kids right next to the road. The funny thing is, though, only like half of us can see it. One counselor, and about 5 of the 9 of us. The others say, "Yeah right, stop playing jokes, you guys." But we insist. There is a thing walking in the road, coming towards us. As it gets nearer, I make out the figure of a woman who looked to be about 40 years old or so. Duck. The girl who had to go to the bathroom has seen her before. I nearly faint, I am so scared. I probably pissed myself, too. Then suddenly, she vanishes. What happened? Where did it go? Still, half of us never saw the thing and didn't believe us. Nothing else happened that night, and we all gradually fell asleep. The next morning, I wake up thinking it was just a nightmare, but I'm in the van. We all confirm that this all actually happened. We all realize that it definitely did happen, and we get the duck out of there as quickly as possible. We didn't even eat breakfast. To this day, I have no idea what the duck any of that was, the siren, the woman, the faucet. Nothing. Hearing my roommates walk around our house as I'm trying to fall asleep at night still scares the duck out of me. I grew up in a remote part of the woods, and I'd like to share some stories. Growing up in the woods was something different. Let's get this straight, I'm just an average person growing up in the woods. Well, not average, but I am normal to a certain extent. I live out in the wilderness in a large forest reserve in the United States. I've lived with my grandparents most of my life. I've never really known my parents before this, but nevertheless, to a certain degree, it doesn't matter. I live in the middle of the wilderness up here. Nowadays my grandparents will be here for a day or two and then leave for a day or two. The length of time they stay and go varies, but in the summertime I only have a handful of friends that are even remotely able to come hang out with me. I live in a very remote area, and all you can see from where I am are mountains and trees. The nearest town is approximately 4 miles away, and it primarily consists of a small shopping center featuring a general store and a few other amenities. However, there is little else of note, offering only basic services such as fuel and food. Oftentimes I get the cabin to myself. It's not exactly an old wooden cabin if you're thinking about it. It's actually very nice. It has 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. It's practically a lodge, but all it's missing is a garage. Our cars park in a tent-like structure. It's just a bunch of wooden poles holding up a sheet metal roof. Because of this, during the winter, we'll often be stuck inside our little cabin for days, weeks, and every once in a while, months. I've learned from my grandfather to go hunting, melt ice into water, and basically become self-sufficient. Going to school in this part of the country is like it's optional. For the sake of keeping us secure, I'll use different names for my friends in future stories, so don't try and come find us. The woods are a strange place. It's like they're their own giant, sentient being. My friends Thomas and James would occasionally head down to a nearby creek a few miles from my house. It was a large creek, almost a river, but it was nothing we couldn't handle. Oftentimes, during the summer, we'd go out for hours without our cell phones and go exploring. We all had cell phones, but there's practically no reception out there unless you're directly inside one of the houses, so usually they were just useless. Thomas and James were my best friends ever since I could practically think. We all lived within a 6-mile radius, a tiny distance considering the size of most of the town. Thomas lived closer to me, so he'd often come over if I was stuck at home. More often than not we'd sit down in the lounge room and just watch old movies that my grandparents had. Our cabin had a large glass window across the front wall, so you could always see into the distant wilderness. One time, a few years back, Thomas, my friend David, and Jasmine were over. It was raining, and my grandparents were out for a few days. David and I became close since he moved in that year. I had only recently gotten my license, so it was a dream. It was storming outside, so I just planned to let David and the others stay the night. It was dark out already, maybe around 10 when the four of us were sitting upstairs in the lounge room watching Stand By Me, one of Thomas's and my favorite movies. We were watching it when we heard a large clanging nearby the garage area. Originally I shrugged it off as wind blowing over the trash cans or raccoons tipping them over until I heard the crash of metal against the building. Despite the rain outside, I knew that the wind was not strong enough to lift the trash can and smash it into the cabin. I got up and managed to convince Thomas to come with me as I walked towards the outside. Before I went downstairs, I entered my grandparents' room and took the shotgun just in case it was a bear or something. Thomas took the fire poker and walked behind me, scared as a bat when I came to the front door. I looked outside and saw nothing yet. I counted to 3 before I opened the door to go outside. This wasn't the first time I had to deal with a bear digging through my ducking trash. Ducking bears and shit. Anyway, Thomas and I go outside and scope out the area. The rain was lighter than I thought it was as the pitch black sky caked the entire yard in darkness. Thomas and I moved forward towards the trash can. I know you're not supposed to keep your finger on the trigger, but in that moment all I could think about is getting that ducking bear away from me. I hated bears ever since I was young, they scared the shit out of me, but I never felt this fear before. I turned the corner with Thomas and found one of the trash cans lying on the ground. I sighed in relief as Thomas looked shocked, looking past the trash. I noticed this, so I asked him what was up. "What are you looking at? Don't you see it?" "See what?" "The big mother ducker." Thomas pointed forward at a figure behind the tree line. I squinted to see it clearly and made out the figure of a bony, fur-covered being. I looked over at Thomas, telling him it was just a bear and to come on and go. Thomas looked in shock as he pointed forward. "Why is it looking at us like that?" I glanced back, being met with yellow, glowing eyes from the darkness. I took the shotgun and ran with Thomas back to the house. Before I ran inside, I tripped and shot my gun. It was one of those times where if Thomas weren't there, I wouldn't be here today. Thomas stopped to pull me up as this weird, distorted roar came from the woods. We didn't have to exchange words to understand it was coming towards us. I left the shotgun and ran inside. Thomas and I slammed the door shut, hell-bent out of breath, as we heard the creature walking around. Thomas told me to go upstairs, get the others, and barricade ourselves in my bedroom. I nodded and quietly went upstairs, doing just that. Thomas met me there shortly after, holding his spare hunting rifle he always brought with him when he came over. We all spent the night in the same bedroom, guarding each other as we heard that thing walking around the cabin over and over again. I fell asleep sometime during the night and woke up the next morning. Going out to the lounge area felt like it was freezing. Every window was open. Nothing was stolen, surprisingly, but there was definitely someone, or something, inside of here. Thomas and I went outside that morning and found my grandparents' shotgun sitting on the front stoop, the barrel bent to an impossible angle. I had no excuse for that when my grandparents came home. Oftentimes during the school year, after school our school had a small skiing program where around 40 to 50 kids all got together on a bus or two to go skiing after school. Doing this was one of the few fun options we got to do for extracurriculars around here. Our high school was small, maybe only 300 kids total. I know, small town. We only had one elementary school and one middle/high school, where grades 6 through 12 all went to the same school. Often enough, my friends and I would do this during the winter to give us something to do. We took a bus around 30 miles to a nearby campus with a large skiing hill in the area. The town was entirely composed of a campus community, with everyone in the area connected to the college in some way. Often, James and I, along with some of our friends, determining the circumstances, would all go skiing together. The mountain wasn't all too big, but the trails were certainly long. Each run would take 10 to 15 minutes to reach the bottom. On this occasion, I was with my friend James. Few of my friends liked skiing, so it was usually just James and I. It was a few years ago when we decided to go with the bus after school. After a relatively short ride, we got off the bus and put on our equipment. We skied for a couple hours with little event. It was just beginning to get dark when James revealed he had a little bit of dope on him. In my high school years, we were what you would call the stoners. James would always get weird shipments, usually just weed, but it would get us off our asses. James pulled me aside and told me he wanted to smoke a joint or two and asked me to come with him. Me, being a teenager that wanted to get high as well, agreed to come with. We skied off the path a little ways, finding a spot where we believed we wouldn't attract attention. It was slightly past the ski mountain's border, so we knew no one would come looking for us. James took out the wrapping paper and rolled us both a joint. We made sure we weren't going to be seen, so we took off our skis and sat under a little overhang of leaves and logs that we made the previous winter. We began talking about what teenagers talk about: girls, video games, our home life, all that shit. As it got darker, James pulled out some candles and lit them, getting us a little bit of light to wrap more weed. After a while, we decided to finish the last joint and head back, as the bus would leave for the school in about an hour. James and I began packing up when an odd noise came from the woods. It didn't sound like it was from an animal or anything, but more robotic, like a broken drill on a low battery. James caught on quicker than I did, alerting me to the noise. If we were sober, we would have most likely hightailed it out of there as soon as we heard it. But like dumb, high teenagers, I thought it would be a good idea to go find the noise. James agreed to come with me, as we had already packed up what we had and set it on the path. James and I both took a candle, walking off towards the noise. The closer we got, the more prominent the noise became, although never growing louder. We walked further into the woods, maybe 50 feet, when we realized we must have passed it as the noise became softer. We began searching around for the noise using our candle light. Back then we never brought our phones on such journeys, we always just brought our watches and wallets to go explore. James walked close to the evergreen tree when suddenly the snow beneath it fell. James fell into a tree well as I heard him yelp in surprise. I ran over and looked down, and I shit you not, there was just a square hole. It must have been a trap door as I looked closer, seeing the reflective patch on James's jacket. I called out to James to see if he was alright. James replied for me to come down there. I know it sounds like something straight out of a horror movie, but in our messed up minds, we thought, oh cool, a trap door in the woods. I obviously obliged, sliding down into the slot in the floor. It was around the size of a kitchen sink, so it was a tight squeeze in. I dropped down with my candle as the room seemed to light up more. It looked like a bunker, as all the shelves and such were entirely devoid of anything. That's when I heard James call me over towards a small steel door along the side. James had a concerned look on his face as I walked over, peering through the window. I was met with only a partially lit room with a single candle sitting inside. It looked like a meat locker room with several rotting animal corpses hanging on meat hooks. I'm so glad the door was shut because I could only imagine the smell. By then I was sobering up a bit more and realized how ducked up this was. I called over to James that we should leave when I hear the familiar buzzing again. I look over and see James rushing back towards the hatch, climbing out as fast as he can. Seeing James react like that is rare, usually he is the calmest person in the group, so seeing him run, so afraid, I chased after him, scrambling after him. The two of us ran towards our skiing equipment up on the ridge where James was hastily putting on his skis. I asked him what happened that spooked him like that. What James told me shook me up. You know how there was that whirring sound coming from there? Yeah? Well, I saw what was making the noise. It was a camera. Oh shit. That's not it? Then what? It was a motion camera. Something was down there with us. That sentence still resonates in my mind. We weren't the only ones down there, and I'm so glad I didn't find out what was down there with us. I understand that it may not be the most frightening story, but it is one that has remained with me. Maybe I'll even go back if I can get over the fear of it. It was a couple of years ago anyway, and the ski hill has since shut down that section of the mountain due to unsafe hazards a year ago. It could be a good bonding exercise for James and me to explore since James got into urban exploring despite the terror he felt there. This next story came from my grandfather when I was just a little boy. My grandpa is typically a reserved man, but occasionally, after a few drinks, he allows me to peek inside. This story happened one fall evening when I was little. I'll tell this story from his perspective so it's easier on the writing. I assure you, we did not expect to find anything out there. Even though I am aware that strange things happen around here, I find it unlikely to encounter them. I went out for a hike that day at noon. It was the type of fall where everything was beginning to turn red and yellow but still warm during the day. God, it was a nice day. I went down the hiking path alone as I did every year. It was maybe a 3-hour trail, so I brought everything I needed, some snacks, a compass, water, my Walkman, and my walking stick. I went down the path with relatively no incident until I was maybe 3/4 of the way down. Most years I'd see the occasional deer or fox or such, but this time was different. It felt as if everything in the woods had cleared out, not even a bird chirping or crickets, just the occasional breeze from the trees. I was down a particularly steep part of the trail, heading down through the trees and winding the path a little when I looked over and saw this bone pyramid. I kid you not, it looked like someone had spent hours making sure it all stuck. On top was most likely a moose skull, but it was odd. All I can remember is the antlers were just weird and bent in an odd shape, and the skull was just built wrong. It was too long and slender to be a normal moose. I saw this and began to move quicker. There was no debris or anything on the thing, so I knew whoever or whatever did this was nearby. I moved quicker, not rushing, but I was unsettled, nevertheless. Now before I go any further, let me just say my family is a firm believer in the creatures of the night, like Bigfoot, the Wendigo, and chupacabras. Now that that's out of the way, let me continue. I believe what I found was some sort of ritualistic belonging in the woods. As I continued on, I began hearing this sort of clicking sound. Like someone clapping two sticks together. The more I walked towards the car, the more prominent it became. I started to get freaked out, and by now I didn't keep my headphones in just in case I was being followed by something. The more I came down the path, the louder the clicking became when I saw the opening of the woods into the parking lot. I rushed over, glad to be near the safety of my car. I rushed out and threw my stuff in the car, never looking back as the clicking remained from the tree line. When I started my car, I looked up and saw this odd-looking silhouette of a man, but his figure was just wrong. It was lumpy, with a large pod of flesh on its arm from what I could see. The more I looked closer, the more fleshy it became. It didn't have eyes, I can remember that. I don't remember how long I stared at it, but it was probably only a few seconds before the shock wore off. I threw my car into drive when I saw its jaw unhinge. It reminded me of an ant eating something or a predator's mouth from a movie, as it made the same clicking sound I had heard earlier. Before I had the opportunity to reflect, my foot pressed the accelerator, and I was en route home. I understand that this may not be the most dramatic conclusion, but it served as a significant reminder that the woods are not always a safe and welcoming environment. This experience is the reason I choose not to travel alone. I'm happy to share more stories if people are still interested. I know it's a lot to ask for, but I'm happy that, by telling people some of these stories, they are interested in this topic. I'll tune in later and see if I should tell more stories. If anyone has any questions about these things, I'll be happy to answer your questions. During one summer I got my first job at a nearby Dairy Queen in town. I met a couple of my friends from there, especially this one girl from Amber. Amber was the type of girl that never really grew out of her horse girl phase but instead adapted to the outdoorsy lifestyle. At that time, I was 16, and she was 20. She shared with me that she was originally from South Dakota, desired to live in the countryside, and had discovered our small town, which she loved. She went to the college campus nearby, a few towns over, and Amber and I became great friends despite the age difference. One winter, Amber decided to let me stay the night out at her dorm. My grandparents were in Missouri at this time, so it was easy to stay. Before you jump to conclusions, I want to clarify that Amber had a boyfriend, and I was interested in another girl from my school. I was lying on Amber's bed, watching her play on her Xbox when Amber's roommate, Caitlin, came into the room. Caitlin immediately asked if she could take her to McDonald's since the buses around town had shut down and she didn't have a car. After some negotiations, Amber finally agreed, and I hopped down to go join them. We drove down into town at that time. It was around 2 in the morning. I'm not going to lie, I was on some stuff when we went out, so before we pulled into the parking lot at McDonald's, I got out my eye drops and let them go inside before me. I hung back as the two entered McDonald's. We would have gone into the drive-thru during this time, but the building was undergoing reconstruction, so the drive-thru area was closed. I finished up the eye drops and got out of the car when, suddenly, I blinked, and I was back in the dorm. I'm looking down, watching Amber playing Halo on her Xbox, when I am filled with shock. I tried to chalk it up to me being tired and imagining things when all of a sudden Caitlin walked in again. The entire ordeal played out again, Caitlin nagging Amber to go to McDonald's, which went on for a minute before Amber agreed. Amber then walked up to me and asked if I wanted to come with her. Me, being weirded out of my mind, said no. I don't know what happened, maybe it was a brain duck up or something, and this isn't particularly scary, but it's definitely something that has ducked with my head. Another story I have is from my cousin who lives in Maine. Every once in a while, either my grandparents or my aunt and uncle would go visit my cousin, Mike. Mike was a few years older than me and grew up in a remote town in northern Maine. This story takes place when my cousin graduated high school. For his vacation before starting college, he decided to go on a 100-mile hike with his girlfriend, Sam, and his friend Aaron, who was also accompanied by his girlfriend, Piper. The four were all outdoorsy people, and they all agreed to pack their gear and head out. They packed 2 weeks' worth of supplies in their backpack, had a friend drive them to the head of the trail, and drop them off. The first few days in the woods were relatively uneventful, although they had encounters with a fox on their second night. On the 5th day, Piper begins telling the group that she's been hearing footsteps walking around the campsite during the night, when everyone was asleep. She assumed it was one of us until we told her in the morning we had all slept through the night. Initially, we dismissed the human footprint in the mud as being made by a raccoon, bear, or something similar. Or at least that's what they thought. A bit uneasy, the four of them quickly packed up and headed off. Another night went by uneventfully. On the seventh night, when they were just getting ready to stop walking and set up camp, Mike saw a weird creature lying on the ground. It was half decomposed with maggots squirming around it. Its skull and part of its chest were exposed. Its skull was almost like an elephant's skull, if you have ever seen one. Elephant skulls have a large hole in the center to make them look like a cyclops when all the flesh is eaten away. Mike tried to dismiss it as a moose with a facial deformity, but Aaron pointed out that all the legs were missing except for one, which resembled a human foot. Upon further inspection, it looked as though a large human foot had been burned on as a replacement for a hoof or whatever was originally there. The group decides to head a little further during the darkness and to not talk about it for the rest of the trip to not scare them. By now Sam was shaking in fear and wanted to leave right away. Mike and the others set up camp a few miles away on a ridge overlooking a relatively small lake surrounded by wilderness. Sam and Piper were having trouble sleeping, so Mike and Aaron took shifts staying up to watch the campsite and keep the campfire lit while they slept, which seemed to ease them. Around what most likely was 3 to 4 in the morning, Aaron was on watch when he heard a twig snap in the woods. Aaron looks up and sees this huge humanoid figure just standing in a nearby clearing maybe 200 feet away. Aaron wakes Mike up to look at the creature, and as soon as Mike wakes up, the yellow eyes appear on the creature, and it darts off back into the woods. Mike and Aaron stayed up until the sun rose, hearing weird grunting sounds coming from the woods every couple of minutes or so. Aaron is convinced that it's Bigfoot, while Mike believes it's someone ducking with them. However, this situation didn't make sense. They were still about 30 miles from the end of their journey, and it seemed unlikely that someone would wait out there just to mess with them. The moment the sun rose, the group packed up. Mike and Aaron both agreed to not say anything to not scare the girls. The next night was relatively uneventful as they all decided that they would finish the trail by the next day. That morning, they woke up to find that the same dead animal carcass they had seen days prior was lying on the path forward, where the end of the trail would be. The group, understandably freaked the duck out, decides to jog most of the way back. After walking a while, the group is tired, and Piper says she's going to go take a leak further in the woods. The group gets out some food for lunch. When Piper comes rushing back, she has a shocked expression on her face. We ask her what's wrong when she explains for us to come see for ourselves. Our stuff is all out, so we decide to leave our stuff behind to go look. Stupid, I know. But they head off just over a small ridge and find this deer. Sam immediately throws up from the smell as the rest of the group looks in shock. The group immediately heads back to find that in a minute or two they were gone. Their stuff had been raided. Mike decided that this was enough and that they were getting out of there tonight. Mike packed up what was left, since a lot of their food was gone, and got the group to head on forward. The group reached the end of the trail when a forest ranger immediately greeted them. The forest ranger said that the trail was closed for the time being since they had found some hazards. The group went home as Aaron did some research. Apparently, a body was found in a creek a few miles in, completely mutilated, with parts missing. Were strung up on a tree. Let's just say that most of the others aren't that big on long-distance camping anymore. Aaron recently tried looking up the original news report, though, and was unable to find the article. Sometimes things are covered up because if people knew that shit, I don't think anyone would ever do another journey like that. Growing up in a small town is a strange ordeal. Everyone seems to know each other very well, and the only new people we get are people on long road trips or family coming to visit us. Like I said, I live in a very small town, yet I love it. Towards the west end of town we have some farms growing. Although most are cattle farms, there are the occasional places where they grow corn, wheat, or whatever they can spread about. Really? There's this old farmhouse that has been abandoned since the 1970s after a supposed murder, although it's most likely that the family moved out, and that's what the rumor spread about. When I was young, my cousin Mike and a few of my friends would visit, and we would ride our bikes together. I remember this was a special occasion since Mike was there. This is the reason we went over there. Mike led our small gang when he was around, and everybody listened, no question. We went down the dirt path, and Mike stopped the bike. It was around noon when Mike spotted the farmhouse, and I swear to God I can still remember the smug look growing across his face as an idea popped into his head. Mike told us that we were playing hide and seek in the house since we didn't have much of anything else to do. James and I reluctantly agreed. We were around 8 to 9 at the time, so we didn't have any judgment against adventure quite at that age. They drew straws, and eventually I was the one that originally had to seek them. I sighed and began to count to 90, as I knew they had both run to the farmhouse. 90 seconds passed as I opened my eyes. I smiled as I saw the door wide open to the farmhouse. Those idiots had forgotten to shut it. I thought to myself as I jogged towards the house. I reached the front stoop, heading inside. I remember the boards being so old that I thought every step I took would cause the floor to collapse. I headed inside, seeing the house on the inside. To the right was a staircase, while to the left led to a living room. Straight ahead leads to a hallway to the kitchen, then towards the back door. I smirked, knowing Mike and James enough to know they'd hide together in the same place. I looked forward as a creak came from down the hallway. I saw the basement door slowly moving in the wind. I smirked, knowing that they were leaving breadcrumbs for me to find. The basement was dark. I didn't even try searching for a light since I knew it definitely wouldn't have any power. Downstairs I heard a dripping sound. It was like a sink had been left on slightly as the water slowly drained out. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs, holding my breath, listening for any breathing. It was dark. I could barely see 5 feet in front of me, and the only light down there came from upstairs. The concrete basement was cold. In fact, the entire basement was entirely cold from what I remember. I began feeling a large anxiety from the basement that I couldn't explain. I listened in and heard a soft breathing noise. By then I knew someone had been hiding down there, and I was going to find them. I called out to them, telling them I knew they were there and I was going to find them. I started walking towards the breathing room, avoiding anything lying around in the basement. I bumped into a piano and accidentally set off a few keys, which scared the shit out of me. Keep this in mind because this will come up later. I reached the back wall, the breathing having gotten louder. I moved to my right, hearing the breathing louder. The breathing felt warmer as I got closer. I reached out to touch them, calling out to the person when the breathing just suddenly stopped. I didn't hear movement or anything, but I continued moving. I reached the end of the wall, finding nothing. I felt odd when suddenly the piano began playing softly. At first I thought it was just in my head, my mind playing tricks on me. I focused in as the music began playing more violently. By now I knew that this wasn't normal, and I began moving back towards the stairs in a panic when the breathing returned, a hot breath on the back of my neck. I screamed as a hand gripped my shoulder, squeezing it softly as I ran. The hand let go as I heard a large crash behind me, like a moose slamming through objects to get to a destination. My legs felt like jello, and my eyes began to water as I climbed the stairs and burst outside. I lay on the ground, sobbing as Mike and James walked over, asking where I had been. I was confused. I was downstairs for only around 5 minutes, but they told me I had been missing for 4 ducking hours. I was confused when they told me they had been looking for me for 3 hours but never checked the basement. When I asked why, they told me that the door had been locked from the inside. And when they asked if anyone was in there, all that returned was silence. These are just some stories that are from my childhood. Thanks for listening. We hope you had a great time listening to all the stories. If you've reached this far, we really appreciate your patience and support. Thank you all. Have a wonderful week ahead.